In the Batman Beyond series, Ra's ends up having to face mortality and jump ship when it comes to his body when it becomes so broken that the Lazarus pits can no longer heal him. He decides to take Talia's body for his own. Not content with being in the body of his daughter, a woman, he comes up with a plot to get Bruce's old body, which he then plans to make young again using the Lazarus pits. This plan involves Ra's posing as Talia in order to seduce an elderly Bruce Wayne, making him believe that Talia has found the secret to youth and wants to share it with Bruce so they can be together. Aw, how sweet. This plan also ends up involving Ra's and Talia's body though making out with Bruce, which was not something that Bruce signed up for, especially when he finds out, wait a minute, so when I was kissing Talia, I was kissing her dad? Ew. What? What? So crazy. Number 9. Losing his fortune. While we haven't explored the full ramifications of this blow yet, it's likely going to end up being a doozy. Everything that Batman has become was all because of his fortune, and over the years and Tynion's run, he's also become more and more reliable on his utility belt and his fancy gadgets. Batman might just be a man, but his billions have backed him up time and time again, acting as a stand-in often for his lack of superpowers. So what happens when Batman loses all that? In Joker War, Batman was targeted by the Joker and his new number 1, Punchline. He lost his money and for a while his sanity thanks to Punchline's specially formulated Joker venom. TM. This made it hard for Batman to regain control of Gotham, but not impossible. In the end, he realized he needed help and reached out to the Bat family, who helped him regain the city. After Joker was defeated, Bruce decided to let Lucius Fox keep the money as a consolation and a reward for all the years of hard work, as well as, some payment for his time being tortured at the hands of Punchline and the Joker, which was pretty terrible. Honestly, Lucius, you deserve that money. Lucius accepted this offer but told Bruce he wanted no more part of helping him with Batman. Lucius Fox was opting out of that crazy world, so if Bruce wanted to continue, he was on his own. No millions and none of Fox's fancy tech. It'll be interesting to see how much this sets Batman back and how he fights to overcome this challenge. Before we move on, just a quick reminder to click that like and smash that subscribe if you haven't already. Go on, do it, and let me welcome you to the top 10 nerd family! Welcome, 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 confetti balloons. Number 8. Bane breaks Batman. This is a pretty terrible one, and yet it's not even the worst point, especially considering Batman did eventually heal and return from this. In Nightfall, we see Batman faced with multiple villains in one night. He's run down and tired, which is when Bane strikes, attempting to take Gotham from the Bat. In an iconic and devastatingly memorable moment, Bane breaks Batman's back, ultimately destroying him. Fortunately, Bruce would recover and return as Batman, but he would need someone to take over for a time. That someone ended up being Azrael Jean-Paul Valley, and passing that mantle on would also lead to some other problems later on for Bats. Number 7. Assaulted by Talia al Ghul. Talia al Ghul may love Batman, but she definitely has a messed up way of showing it. When Damian was conceived, it was not really out of love. Talia actually assaulted Bruce, drugging him and sleeping with him in order to get the child she so desired. All in all, it's really messed up. What's even more strange is it seems like the story of Damian's existence could have been inspired by Son of the Demon, where Talia and Bruce consummate their marriage consensually and Talia reveals she is with child. She later fakes a miscarriage to keep Batman focused on fighting the bad guys and avoid distracting him, but in truth has the child in secret and gives it up for adoption, realizing she and Batman can never truly be together. This story, while still messed up and awful considering Bruce, never knows of his son's fate and it's kept a secret, is still less disturbing than the one we got for Damian Wayne. Drugging and assaulting someone is very much not okay. No, no, no. Don't do it. It's terrible. Number 6. Death of his fiancée. For those who aren't aware, there was a time that Batman was engaged. In fact, there have been multiple occasions where Batman was engaged and married. For our purposes here though, I'm talking about when Bruce Wayne became engaged to his old flame, Silver St. Cloud. Silver has been a Gotham socialite who had a passionate romance that initially ended when Silver learned of the fact that Bruce Wayne was actually Batman. She loved Bruce but couldn't stand the thought of losing losing him. Years later, she returned to Gotham and ended up falling back in love with both Bruce Wayne and Batman, breaking off her current engagement to a US senator. Her and Bruce were engaged, and he was even thinking of retiring from the Batman mantle to pursue a normal life with Silver and settle down with her. However, these dreams were cut short when Silver was killed by Automatopoeia, who was posing as Batman's new ally at the time, Baphomet, a man that Batman trusted so much that he even revealed his secret identity to him and welcomed him into the Batcave. Big mistake, Bruce. No wonder Batman has trust issues, jeez. Number 5. Failed Barbara Gordon. One of the hardest failings for Batman was when Barbara Gordon and her father, Commissioner Gordon, were successfully targeted by the Joker. Caught unawares, Babs found herself shot through the spine and paralyzed as a result of the attack. She was assaulted and tormented by the Joker, who took pictures of her in pain and undressed for the purpose of making her father insane. This all happened in Killing Joke, and though not all of the events of that story are canon, Babs' pain and becoming paralyzed were made canon. Batman has always felt awful for what happened to Barbara, has never really blamed her, and if anything, himself feels more guilty for the fact that he wasn't able to protect her. Number 4. Death of Jason Todd. The loss of Jason Todd hit Batman hard, and who is to blame? Those who voted for him to be killed. It's your fault. Well, actually, it might not be your fault. You might have not been alive, or you may have not voted. Anyways, some people don't even believe the vote was real still, that it's all a conspiracy. And yet, I digress. Why this was so hard for Batman was because Jason Todd, of course, was both his ward and his Robin. Though the two had a falling out previously, Batman ended up teaming up with Todd once more to help him find his birth mother. Although they found her, it was revealed that she was involved in a plot with the Joker, which ended up resulting in both her and Jason's death. Batman would never forgive himself for what happened to Jason, and when Jason returned from death, it was made evident that Jason likely wouldn't ever be able to fully forgive Batman either. He's like, I died because of you, because you didn't save me. Which, you didn't save him, so I guess sort of fair. Number 3. Death of his parents. Obviously, one of the worst things to happen to Bruce Wayne happened early in his life and would have to be the death of his parents. Without them dying, he wouldn't be the man he is today, for better or for worse. It's actually an interesting thing to imagine a world where Bruce gets to keep his parents and grows up normally. Would he still grow up normally? I wonder. The death of his parents tormented young Bruce so much that it, along with the freak encounter with the Bat, inspired him to become the masked vigilante known as Batman. So in a way, it's this trauma that has led to so much of the other awful experiences that Batman has suffered through, countless physical injuries, as well as mental and emotional turmoil. Not only that, but the loss of his parents has been a trauma that Batman has never healed from and has carried throughout his entire life. Number 2. Death of Alfred. Although his parents' death changed him forever, he was left with at least one father figure to help him carry on, the faithful family butler, Alfred Pennyworth. Alfred served Master Bruce, but also took care of him and raised him, acting as a father to him. Alfred has come in harm's way a few times in the comics, but one of the most devastating blows that both he and Master Bruce had to suffer came when Bane full-on killed Alfred, snapping his neck. Bane was working to break Bruce fully, and this was just another part of his master plan. He even was part of Catwoman kinda leaving him at the altar, which is another terrible thing that happened here. Bane had taken Alfred hostage and told the Bat family to stay away or else. Damian, however, didn't listen, believing he could take Bane down himself. When Damian failed, Bane killed Alfred, and in so doing, broke Bruce's heart. Number 1. Tortured and killed on repeat. When Joker received 99.9% of Mr. Mixia's Pitilix power, he used it to wreak all kinds of havoc. One of the things he used these new epic reality warping powers for was to torment Batman forever on repeat. Daily, Emperor Joker would torture and kill Batman, although in the end Batman was the key to Joker's defeat, being Joker's one true weakness, since his identity was so closely tied to Batman's. However, Batman was left so traumatized by these events that he became a broken man, a shadow of his former self, unable to operate as a hero. Superman actually had to steal the memories of this experience away in order to return Batman to himself once more so he could resume being a hero and just, not being a complete mess. Number 10. Mind wiped. While in current continuity this might not make as much sense given many people believe that Emma is in fact more powerful than Charles, and I've actually seen her kick his butt before, regardless of your opinions on who would win in a telepathic battle, this happened before Emma was as developed when it came to her skill set. Professor X and Moira McTaggart Taggart came to visit Emma when she was working as a dancer at the Hellfire Club. Being Emma, she didn't have any shame in what she was doing and used her powers to get more money out of the gentlemen who came to the club to watch her dance. She tried to use this trick on Charles, who offered a different path for her, a place at his school. When Emma refused his offer, he ultimately decided to wipe her mind of their ever meeting. Whether this was for better or worse remains to be seen. Charles thought it was for the best, but I would argue having your mind wiped against your will is never really a good thing. Number 9 was lied to. I mean, everyone was pretty much lied to about this, but you'd think at least Scott would share his plans with the woman that he loved. He didn't though, because he knew what Emma's answer would be, so rather than open up, he kept his mouth shut and kept it from her. What am I talking about? Cyclops and Wolverine's creation of the X-Force. While Emma is all for moral ambiguity, even X-Force for her and many others was seen as a general bad idea and taking things a little too far. The other thing, of course, was that neither she nor any of the other X-Men were even consulted on this decision, which of course made the whole revelation a lot worse. And before we move on to our number 8 spot, just a quick reminder to give that like a click if you haven't already. Seriously, if you click like, it makes your day better. It is statistically proven. Number 8, choked by Medusa. I mean, this whole event was not necessarily great in my opinion for Emma or the X-Men or the Inhumans. Not a high moment overall. At the very least, just the outfit that Emma is wearing here is something else. Super protective shoulder pads and a giant belt buckle. It's definitely a statement. I'm just not sure it's a good one, especially when I'm used to Emma being such a fashionable character. That belt buckle is the thing that really bothers me in this outfit. Why is the belt buckle so big? It's like as big as her almost her entire midsection. Who made that belt? Is it made for giants? Anyways, it's fine. It just really bothers me when belt buckles are that big. What happened to Emma in Inhumans vs. X-Men that was really so terrible though, was how she ended up getting her butt kicked by Medusa, who used her hair powers to choke Emma. Emma was unable to use her telepathy while in her diamond form, and despite being in her diamond form, actually could have potentially been crushed by Medusa's hair if not for the intervention of Havoc, who saved her here. She was already beginning to break actually under the pressure when he showed up. Whew, that was a close one. You can see a piece of her fall. I don't know what piece that was, but hopefully nothing too valuable. Number 7, betrayed by her lover. For a guy who loves her, Scott sure has a funny way of showing it during Avengers vs. X-Men. Granted, he was not himself here as he was possessed by the Phoenix Force, but it still really sucked. Also, Emma was possessed by the Phoenix Force at the same time, so I feel like he doesn't get that as an excuse for this one. Emma and Scott were the last of the Phoenix Five to be left standing, wielding the immense power of the Phoenix Force. But while Emma was still relatively doing okay and kind of holding her own with all this power, Cyclops had his mind corrupted and was starting to turn dark. Driven mad by the influence of Dark Phoenix, Scott turned on Emma, taking all her power for himself so that he had enough power to do what he believed needed to be done. And then he used that power to kill Professor X, who tried to stop him. Although I don't think Emma would have minded this part terribly, as she kinda does tend to blame Charles for messing Scott up. So she'd probably be like, well, that's what you get for messing Scott up as a kid, which is evident later as well when she telepathically kicks Charles's butt, and I love that fight. X-Men Legacy, so good! Number 6, assassinated. This was revealed to have happened at the very end of issue 139 of New X-Men. Emma was shot while in her diamond form with a diamond bullet strong enough to basically shatter her. The horrifying thing was that while not physically alive, her consciousness actually still resided and was essentially trapped within her shards. After an investigation and Emma being returned to life by the efforts of Beast and Jean Grey, it was revealed that Esme, one of Emma's cuckoos, was the one who was to blame. Esme, being one of Emma's students, made this a painful revelation, but it also likely would have been horrifying to be reduced to just bits of consciousness trapped in shards and then be reassembled by Jean's Phoenix Force fire. This whole thing sounds pretty terrible to me. Number 5, Jean Grey broke her. When it comes to the rivalry between Emma and Jean, it's something that has always been there. Even now in Krakoa, when everyone is evolving and moving forward, there is still that spark of competition between the two women, even though now it's at least more of a respectful one than one of pure hatred or distaste. Back when Emma, however, had a psychic affair with Scott, who is Jean's husband at the time, the two were literally like fire and ice with one another, complete opposites and true enemies. The revelation that Emma and Scott were having an affair behind Jean's back caused Jean to completely go off the handle. She brutally, telepathically attacked Emma while trying to get to the bottom of what happened between her and Scott in Hong Kong, making her relive some of her worst traumas to mentally torture Emma, and in the end leaving her broken. Emma was left seeing herself as shallow, spiteful, and manipulative, believing, like Jean, that she was completely in the wrong and losing her sense of confidence and her own high self-esteem. Messing with Jean's relationship left Emma not just burned by her fire, but scorched. In other words, you don't want to mess with Jean Grey. Don't do it. Number 4. Mr. Kendall. Let's talk about the whole teacher-student thing that went on with Emma Frost and Ian Kendall, Emma's teacher. This whole thing is just pretty awful, and also Ian was irresponsible and in the end also terribly judgmental of Emma and broke her heart, which honestly doesn't even make this whole situation much worse because it was already just so awful to begin with. Ugh. As though Emma didn't already have enough on her plate being a villain turned hero in the comics, writers felt that they needed to make Emma even more complex in her own series, Emma Frost, from the early 2000s. So Emma developed a weird romantic relationship with her teacher. She appeared to be the instigator here, but this also seems to be used as a way to kind of like give Mr. Kendall a scapegoat in the end. Like he's like, oh, I didn't want to be attracted to her, but I couldn't help myself. And he's like, you know, I really don't want this, but Emma really wants this. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what's happening here? Emma was like no student, no woman he'd ever known. That's actually something that is said in the series. Oh my goodness. The romance initially was stopped by Emma's father, Winston, when Emma was in high school, but would later resume when Emma ran into Ian again when she was attending university and was no longer his student. In the end, he rejected her not because their whole relationship was wrong, but because she was a filthy and in his mind dishonest mutant. So that's how that ended. I feel like it should have ended like, actually this is wrong, the end. But no. Number 3. Attack on her school. As Emma became more of a teacher in the comics, she at one point got a school of her own. She ran the school alongside Banshee Sean Cassidy. Her school not only contained mutants, but at one point also operated as a school for non-powered children as well. Emma did her best to keep the peace and, for the most part, was pretty successful until her sister Adrienne showed up and rocked her world. Adrienne had her own plans for Emma and the school. She terrorized both students and her sister when she planted bombs in the school and threatened to blow everyone sky high, attempting to murder many of the students there. Emma managed to fight off Adrienne while students Sink and Banshee handled the bombs, but in the end it cost Sink his life. He sacrificed himself to save human students when the last bomb couldn't be stopped, which also meant part of the school was blown apart as well. Number 2. Punished for having powers. When Emma's parents found out she had powers, rather than accept their daughter or even run in fear of her, they refused to acknowledge that any of it was truly real and decided instead to deal with the problem as if it were any other problem that children from wealthy families such as Emma's suffered. They decided to send Emma to an asylum, but not one really bent on rehabilitating its patients. Her parents referred to it as the clinic. There Emma was doped up and sedated, and it was also implied that the guards took advantage of her vulnerability as well while she was there. Eventually, Emma found a way to reach into the minds of her captors there and was able to manipulate them into helping her escape. Number 1. Her team was killed. If there is anything that Emma cherishes and loves the most, it is her students. There is nothing she wouldn't do to protect them, and honestly, in any reality where Emma has become a mother, we've seen just how fiercely loyal and protective she can be when it comes to her own children. The same sentiment in the main continuity generally extends to those that she teaches. So one of the worst things that can ever happen to her, and has ever happened to her, is to see those who put faith in her, those who she helped to grow and teach, killed. That's exactly what happened when her students got caught up in a battle involving Sentinels that were teleported right into the middle of a mutant party, which both the Hellions and Emma happened to be at. Emma was left in a coma in the aftermath, and pretty much all of her Hellions were left dead. And also, remember when I was talking about how Jean mentally tortured her? A lot of what Jean tried to use for that was just basically any experiences where Emma had lost students. Basically, dead students are like Emma's worst nightmare and her worst reality. Poor Emma. Number 10. Childhood trauma. You might think Peter has some pretty intense childhood trauma himself, and he does, but he's not alone here. MJ also had a rough childhood. She grew up in a home where her family was constantly forced to move because her dad, a professor, always felt the need to take on new jobs and move to new schools. Maybe because he had an anger problem, or as MJ speculated, because he was looking for some kind of satisfaction that he never really could find. This made it hard for MJ to make new friends, but she forced herself to be even more outgoing and charismatic, entertaining her classmates and making everyone fall in love with her. That classic MJ charm. However, what her friends didn't know was at home she and her sister Gail and her mom were suffering. Her father mistreated them and even at one point attacked Gail in front of Mary Jane. Eventually, her mother left her father, but I don't think MJ ever really healed from her trauma, instead choosing to use her love of performing as a creative outlet and a means of escape. Number 9. Losing her mom. Not only did Mary Jane have a difficult life growing up, but she also lost her mother at a young age, after her father had disappeared from her life, and right around the time her sister had her husband walk out on her, while she was pregnant with their last child. Oh my goodness. The death of her mom took a toll on MJ and served as a wake-up call. Feeling her mother and her sister had both wasted their lives, giving up on their passions to become mothers, she left her sister, moving in with her Aunt Anna in Brooklyn, and decided to pursue her own dreams of becoming a professional actress. And before we move on to our next spot, just a quick little reminder to give that like a little click. It really helps us out on the channel, and thank you so much if you've already done so. Number 8. Killed by love. This one only ranks lower because it is technically from an alternate future, but it's still pretty terrible. In Spider-Man Reign, Mary Jane dies young after getting cancer, which despite it also being implied with her mom to run in her family in terms of her medical history, it is in this case caused by her closeness to Peter Parker himself and all his radioactive fluids. In the end, Peter's radioactivity is the one to blame for Mary Jane's death, and she lives on in his memories, haunting him. We also need to acknowledge how unkind, senile old Peter is to ghost memory MJ, because that is also very much a thing in Spider-Man Reign. In typical Peter fashion, he seems to almost take out his own feelings of guilt on her ghost, having more than a few outbursts that are directed at MJ's non-existent self. Number 7. Suffered Peter Parker's hostility. There are multiple times that Mary Jane has suffered being emotionally mistreated by Peter, but this moment in retrospect for me is one of the worst. Just after Gwen died, Peter was caught tearfully mourning her by MJ, who had been waiting in Harry and Pete's apartment. She was in a lot of pain at the time, having just heard of Gwen's death and mourning her basically best friend Gwen herself. Peter, however, did not want to hear it and insisted his pain was actually greater than hers and that she couldn't possibly understand how hurt he was. Wow, what a cruel and immature way to respond. Like, I know Peter was hurting, but ouch. MJ did not deserve this. He also goes on to say, "Don't make me laugh, Mary Jane. You wouldn't be sorry if your own mother died." Whew. This stings quite a bit given what we now know of MJ's past, that Mary Jane's mother did die, and that it was extremely painful for her. Granted, Peter might not have known this yet, in fact I'm pretty sure he didn't in terms of continuity, but still, ouch. I'm sure when he found out about that later, he thought back to those words and was like, oh, I was pretty terrible, that was bad. I hope he apologized to her later. Number 6. Fan hate. The fan hate that we see by some is actually seen as being created somewhat by Marvel's hate for her character, depending on who we talk to. So what's really going on here? Why do people hate MJ? Well, there are Spider-Man fans who blame Mary Jane almost exclusively for Gwen's death. Not like a conspiracy theory like, Mary Jane was secretly the Green Goblin or anything weird like that. It's more just that MJ basically caused Gwen to be killed because writers wanted MJ and Peter to be together, and many fans actually would have rather that he stayed with Gwen, who they think is a more suitable fit. So the way they see it, if MJ wasn't around, Gwen would still be around today. Then there are those who criticize her fancy-free lifestyle and just how she's kinda all about having fun. People didn't think that she was serious enough, though really with the context of her history, it's kinda hard to see how people felt this was a problem. That's kinda just part of Mary Jane's characterization, and it makes sense if you know her history. Then there are those who feel she simply isn't well enough written, that she's basically an underdeveloped character without really much depth. Regardless, there is a lot of hate that gets thrown MJ's way that I think in most cases is very undeserved. Let me know what you folks think of this hate in the comments. Number 5. Had her marriage retconned. While this is pretty bad, her relationship with Peter Parker hasn't been all that great, which is why I'm ranking this one so low. Given all that MJ has gone through during her marriage, it might be better honestly if it never happened. Although I'm sure Mary Jane's love of Peter would prevent her from ever agreeing with me. Because yeah, that love is pretty strong, Tiger. Mary Jane and Peter's marriage was the price that Spider-Man was asked to pay Mephisto in exchange for his help in saving Aunt May's life. Rather than let his elderly Aunt May pass away, Peter agreed. Which is pretty crazy considering, Aunt May's really old, so like, you could've just maybe let her go, but I guess not. And if you're wondering why he didn't ask other people for help here, who are superheroes, magic users, scientists, and or doctors, there's some people I'm sure that are all of those things, he actually did ask them for help, and apparently no one else could help him. This was a truly terrible comics moment, but it happened and it resulted in Peter's and Mary Jane's lives forever being changed. Number 4. Thought dead, then kidnapped. Mary Jane was on a flight to a shoot when the plane exploded and she was presumed dead. For over a year in comics, MJ was simply a ghost haunting Peter, who truly believed that she was actually gone. In reality, Mary Jane had been kidnapped by a mutant stalker who was obsessed with her and with becoming Spider-Man himself, known only as Stalker. It was revealed that this villain was a mutant who planned to use their telepathic powers to, in essence, become Peter and take over his life. Mary Jane was kept locked away and kidnapped by this villain for months before Spider-Man finally came to rescue her. In the end, she and Peter got away after she managed to knock out her captor using a chair to basically hit Spidey, which, because Stalker was psychically linked to him, hurt him more than it did Peter, who obviously is much more resilient, I'm sure, than Stalker. The whole thing, I feel like, should have really taken more of a toll on just about everyone involved, but hey, comics, so I feel like we never really talk about it again. Number 3. Terrorized by Venom. One of the moments that caused a lot of grief and trauma for MJ took place when she was completely terrified by Venom's appearance and presence. Not only was MJ left almost broken by the experience, almost perpetually and severely afraid of the villain, but this wouldn't be the last that she'd see of Venom either. Venom has not only terrified MJ in the main continuity, but he has also done so in alternate universes too, where he has targeted both her and other members of Peter's and generally also MJ's family together. Due to her intensely negative relationship with the symbiote, fans even were initially triggered at the sight of the black suit when we were given a variant cover featuring MJ bonded with the symbiote in place of Eddie Brock. This was intended to celebrate MJ, but it definitely stirred up some mixed feelings for many of her fans. Although it is a cool variant, it does look cool, I will say. Number 2. Assassination attempts. We all talk about when Peter hit Mary Jane in the midst of a fight between him and Ben, but few people seem to recall that Peter also tried to kill Mary Jane during the events of the Clone Saga. So it wasn't necessarily his fault here, as he was programmed, brainwashed into doing so by the Jackal, but it still makes for a horrific experience for Mary Jane either way, who at the time was also pregnant with their child. Terrified, she was forced to flee from Peter, running for her life and seeking help from anyone she could find, any of Spider-Man's hopefully superpowered allies. Basically, the Clone Saga was just a really hard time for MJ and pretty much everyone else. It was just a hard time. Number 1. Baby was taken. One of the worst things to ever happen to MJ was when she was tricked into believing that her and Peter's baby was born stillborn. Mary Jane had a complicated and challenging pregnancy, and it was even implied that her baby would be born with powers, or develop them over time, possibly even being born a mutant. While out at a restaurant, Allison Mongrain, working for Norman Osborn, slipped something into Mary Jane's food, which resulted in her going into labor. She was then told the baby that she gave birth to was actually stillborn, when in reality the baby was not dead but lived and was kidnapped by Mongrain and delivered to Osborn, who paid her to take the baby away to Europe, never to be seen or heard from again. It's later suggested the child perished, but there isn't really much explanation as to why Osborn did this, especially so secretly, without MJ and Peter really ever learning of what truly happened till much later. It more feels like this was part of an unresolved plot that someone was writing, and the writers just really didn't want the young couple to start a family, so they were like, I guess we'll just leave this, and their baby's gone. The end. Number 10. Being named traitor. As awful as this one is, it ranks a little lower on our list because, well, Wanda kind of deserved this one. After the events of House of M, Wanda was seen as one of the biggest mutant traitors around, still being believed at this point to be a mutant. Oddly enough, Scarlet Witch was one of the few prominent mutants in comics who has never been part of the X-Men team, and was really only an Avenger. If you're wondering why that is, a big part of it in the later years has to do with mutants hating her due to the fact that she basically wiped them from existence with her wish of no more mutants, which we now refer to as decimation. Well, that and she was initially too busy serving on her father's villainous team of mutants, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Still, although she did earn the title traitor, much of what has happened as a result of House of M happened because of basically how harshly people were treating Wanda. So, although she earned the title traitor, it still feels a little harsh to say that she entirely deserved it. I've always thought of Wanda as more of a misguided villain when she plays that role, as opposed to a true and sincere villain in the comics. Number 9. Cast as a villain. To expand on our previous point a bit more, a few of the worst things that have happened to Scarlet Witch usually involve her being cast in some kind of villainous role, despite the fact that she is truly a hero when it all comes down to it. Scarlet Witch only ever wants to do what's best, and usually it's some kind of outward manipulation or force that turns her momentarily evil, or causes her to break down and commit some kind of heinous action. It does make for some pretty interesting stories, but it's pretty awful the number of times and how severely Scarlet Witch has been used in this way by others, and when it comes to storytelling. Number 8. Betrayed by her fiancé. Remember when Wanda was about to marry Dr. Doom, and then it was implied that he really only wanted to be with her because he wanted to take her power from her? Granted, it seemed like he also wanted to do so to help her and help the world, but of course, it's still Doom, so you can bet that ego and selfishness were a big part of the reasoning behind this plot as well. Scarlet Witch no longer remembered who she was when her reincarnated son and member of the Young Avengers, Wiccan, came to find her. All she knew was that she loved Victor Von Doom and was ready to marry him, despite the fact that he had kind of manipulated her. Her love was real, but the backstory that she believed she belonged to wasn't. Wanda ended up spurned and mistreated by Doom even after the truth came out, and she still tried to help him. And before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying it. It really does help us out, I promise. Number 7. Being named pretender. What could be worse than being referred to as a traitor? Well, how about when Scarlet Witch was referred to as an imposter? This was the new label she was given after it was revealed that she was not actually a mutant, but had been led to believe that she was one for most of her life, due to the High Evolutionary disguising her and her twin brother as both mutants after experimenting on them, and apparently giving them powers himself. During the Dawn of X relaunch in an issue of X-Men, we actually see stories being told of Scarlet Witch where young mutants are taught to refer to her as a pretender, someone who posed as a mutant but was not one and could not be trusted. Seems a little unfair considering that Wanda herself did not know her true origin until much later in life. She wasn't lying, she had been manipulated into believing she was truly a mutant and Magneto's daughter. Number 6. Death of her family. Even in the MCU, Wanda has a tragic origin story. In the cinematic universe, she and her brother Pietro were orphaned at a young age after they managed to survive an attack that collapsed their apartment. Their parents were killed in the explosion that decimated their home, but they survived after a second missile landed but did not explode. However, this experience would go on to haunt them for the rest of their days, with the name on the missile being burned into their memories for years to come. And that name, of course, was Stark, which is why when we first meet the Maximoff twins in Age of Ultron, they are enemies and not allies of the Avengers. Number 5. No one to help! This point has some more specific spoilers for the latest episode of WandaVision, episode 6. So if you haven't gotten there yet, you maybe want to skip this one if you want to avoid spoilers, or if you haven't seen it but you're like, I'm living through the spoilers, man, which is fine. In the latest episode of WandaVision, it's Halloween in Westview as we proceed along our sitcom timeline into the world of basically kind of a Malcolm in the Middle inspired era, which aired actually in the 2000s, despite this episode having a very 90s feel, and despite that series having a 90s feel. Trying to solve the mystery of what's really going on in Westview, Vision lies to Wanda about not being able to join her and the kids trick-or-treating, due to being on duty for neighborhood watch. Now, in reality, he actually spends the evening investigating Westview and eventually finds the town's reality warping barrier, which he attempts to cross, not knowing that this will likely end up killing him. As outside of this altered reality, which it's hinted at is numbered as 2800 in the MCU, despite the fact that I think that number is already taken in the comics, Vision is in fact dead. When he moves to leave the town, we watch as he struggles against the magical barrier, which obviously very much wants to keep him within town limits. Sword watches as he attempts to move into their world, seeing him fall to pieces, slowly dissolving in front of them. And as a handcuffed Darcy Lewis shouts for them to do something, like help this man. But that doesn't end up happening. They just run. In the end, it's up to Wanda to save the day when Billy alerts her that he senses that his dad is in danger. Wiccan to the rescue. Number 4, manipulated into being a villain. I really do feel for Vision. Most of the most terrible things that have happened to him in the comics or otherwise are honestly my worst nightmare, which is being controlled by other people. In this case, we're talking about when he was sent in to kill the Avengers and seemingly in some kind of murderous trance. Once the team attempted to reason with him, it became apparent that this synthozoid enemy wasn't all he appeared to be, and in fact that he might not truly be acting of his own volition. In the end, Vision would end up becoming an ally to the Avengers, fighting against his instincts to do them harm. They'd actually help him by deprogramming his murderous urges, and he would eventually go on to join the Avengers outright, fighting many times against his creator and father, Ultron. Many times. Many times. Ultron never stays dead. Number 3, infected with a Hydra virus. During the events of Secret Empire, Steve Rogers would end up having his whole life history rewritten and be revealed as a long-time sleeper agent for Hydra. Our heroes would, however, find out too late about Rogers' true allegiances, and so Captain America would become Captain Hydra, or Hydra Supreme, and would take over the United States of America for the glory of Hydra. But he would also end up recruiting some of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, including Scarlet Witch and Vision. But how did he convince them to join the side of evil? Well, he didn't. For Wanda, Hydra actually awoke Chthon within her in order to take control of her body and make use of her powers. And if you want to learn more about Chthon and that whole thing, you can check out the worst things that happened to Wanda's list, where we talk about that a bit more. For Vision, being a synthezoid, they merely infected him with a virus. That was easy. And although Vision tried to fight it, he remained unable to break free and fight against Hydra until near the end of the event. Like the second last issue, I believe, in the main one. Secret Empire number 9. Number 2, death. While those who only knew Vision from the MCU might think of his tear-jerking demise in Endgame, comic fans know that a fate worse than being destroyed, at least the first time around, awaited him in the comics. Here, instead of Wanda destroying him at his own request, urging her on with words of affirmation and love, Vision ends up being controlled against his will by her, which leads to him ending up in a direct conflict that he doesn't actually want any part of, which ultimately leads to his very gruesome death. Not only does he melt and vomit up silver pods, which transform into Ultron bots, but overkill comes into play when She-Hulk then decides to go into a rage and ends up tearing him down the middle, which is a pretty epic and permanent kind of on-panel death. Although, of course, even if you get ripped down the middle, that's probably not the end of you, because comics. Vision is still a synthetic being, and he can be recreated. So don't worry, he would be rebuilt, and he would return once more. But what a death to come back from. Number 1, weaponized. During the events of Avengers Disassembled, which led right into House of M, Wanda ended up suffering from a mental break, and as such ended up turning on her fellow Avengers. You'd think Vision, being one of the Avengers who, is married to Wanda, would be safe, but no. Wanda ended up not only getting him killed, but it was the way in which she did it, I think, that just really cut him deep. She didn't just put him in the right places to be torn apart by She-Hulk, but she actually turned him into into a weapon to be used against his friends and teammates, the Avengers. Vision actually warned them when he came to them that he was no longer in control of his body before vomiting up those pods, which turned into Ultron robot drones, who then attacked the Avengers after their mansion had already been attacked. This was just a real bad day all around for the whole team. When Vision returned to life and Wanda much later came to ask for forgiveness, it would actually be this memory that would prevent him from being able to forgive his wife, Scarlet Witch. He was like, I can forgive the fact that you had a mental break, but you literally turned me against my friends and made me like hurt them, and some of them died. It's like pretty crazy.
Kicking off the list at number 10, smacked by Thanos. We got to see Captain America and many others get the beatdown of their lives in Avengers Infinity War, but in the comic, in Infinity Gauntlet, it was somehow even more brutal. Yet in part 4 of Jim Starlin's The Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos at one point weakens himself while maintaining the stones because he wanted to take on the Avengers in a more equal fight. All of this just to impress Death. So he makes himself weak and then fistfights them. It's crazy. So Captain America is leading the Avengers into battle, and at this point, everybody is getting hit. Cyclops gets his head stuck in a clear block of force. Vision gets his insides just torn out. And then Thanos sees Cap as having such an emotional outburst. And then after Thanos destroys Cap's shield, he gives him the mighty backhand of a lifetime, knocking him out cold. And before we continue on to number 9, guys, if you could just go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it really goes a long way for us here at the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. Number 9, he lost Bucky. Okay, 2005 was a wild time. We got to see Jason Todd return as the Red Hood, and Marvel had their own type of super sleeper assassin come back from the dead as well, Bucky Barnes. In 2005, Bucky Barnes returned, but of course he was never the same. Near the end of World War II, Bucky and Cap were trying to disarm a bomb on a plane while taking down Baron Zemo. The bomb went off, hurling Steve and Bucky into the freezing waters, and well, as for Cap, he came out of this pretty good. He remained frozen, just hanging out, and Bucky, he didn't end up so lucky. His body fell into the freezing waters, and at the time, a Soviet spy submarine was in the area crossing the English Channel. So they scooped him up, fixed the whole left arm situation, brainwashed him, and turned him into this brutal assassin. It's heartbreaking. See, he has all these incredible abilities that make him a fierce warrior, but he doesn't remember how he got them, making him this deadly assassin and a super crazy villain to handle. This is Steve's right-hand man. Every conflict that they go through is just painful. One of the biggest turning points of Marvel was the introduction of the Winter Soldier. This was a conflict that came to life on the big screen back in 2014 with the Winter Soldier, and we're kind of still seeing Bucky try and figure this life out. With the Falcon and the Winter Soldier coming next month on Disney Plus, we can see even more of what he has to go through post-Winter Soldier times. Number 8, Hail Hydra. This next one resulted in writer Nick Spencer getting death threats. That's right, so fans were mostly not okay with this one. Back in 2016, Captain America said 2 words that would throw every comic book fan for a loop: Hail Hydra. It all went down in 2017 Secret Wars, when Captain America's reality had been rewritten secretly by Kobik, who was a sentient cosmic cube acting under the influence of the Red Skull. So as a child, Steve was recruited and raised to believe in their ideology, which was the strong ruling for the weak, for the good of all. Now there's a pleasant nod to this in Avengers Endgame, of course, when the team goes back in time to the first Avengers plot. We see Steve get in the elevator to try and get the scepter, and then we see the whole Hydra/Shield elevator stocked full of guys. Now we don't know this at the time, but that's fully Hydra. But Steve knows this. So instead of beating everybody up and kicking ass in the elevator like he did in Winter Soldier, he just said, Hail Hydra. And then just like that, he walked out of the elevator with a smirk on his face. It was beautiful. Number 7, Old Man Cap. At the end of Avengers Endgame, now that we're talking about it, we see Captain America return the Infinity Stones. Only he doesn't shoot back to the present day after he's done. No, he sticks around, hangs out with Peggy, dances the night away, and then we see him as an old man giving the shield down to Sam Wilson just minutes later. It's a lovely end to Chris Evans' run on the character. You got a lot of feels. But in the comics, we also saw an old Captain America, but this time, it wasn't on his terms. The Iron Nail sucked all of Cap's serum out, leaving him not ripped, but also not young as well. So now Steve looked 90, and there's no way you're gonna fight at that age, let alone pick up a shield. So he would lead the Avengers and call out orders from the radio. It sounds like a pretty sweet job for us, but for Steve, he's probably like, man, this is the most boring job I've had in my entire life. Number 6. William Naslund. He was originally introduced in the comics as the Spirit of 76 in Invaders issue 14. William Asland also held Captain America's mantle for a brief moment. This What If comic turned out to be canon, so back after the apparent death of Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes at the end of World War II, the United States approached him to be the new Captain America. The first replacement. Wow, how exciting would that be? So much pressure though. So he had the shield for a brief amount of time. He had done a couple of missions and then he died in action. Yeah, he had to fight off these robots and he ended up in the hands of one of them and was crushed to death. But he went down a hero. He activated a flare device that made the robot inactive, and he also summoned the other members of the All-Winners to come to the rescue. So he went out a hero, short but sweet. Number 5. Marvel zombies. If there's one thing we know now in 2021, it's that a virus can spread pretty damn fast. Hence why I'm in my closet instead of in the studio. We're trying our best here to keep clean and keep things moving, but this world makes it hard to do so because of this virus. And in a world where we're trying to slow that spread speed down at all costs, a guy like Quicksilver would be the opposite when it comes to help. So in Marvel Zombies, Quicksilver is actually part of the group sent to Earth to battle these zombies, but when he comes across Scarlet Witch in danger, he runs over to help her out, only to find out it's actually Mystique in disguise, an infected Mystique in disguise. And then it's over just like that. She bites him, turning the fastest guy in the world into a zombie. And then he uses his incredible speed to turn everybody all around the world into zombies super fast. He's actually the sole reason it became unstoppable. So let's keep that Quicksilver out of this world. Stay in 616, go, do your thing, have fun, but just don't come into this one. Don't come into 2021. We don't want that. Number 4, tried to heal mutants. So after the House of M incident, Pedro tried desperately to bring his powers back, so he snuck into the Terrigen Mist chamber in attempts to fix himself, and while he was there, he stole the pieces of Terrigen and exposed them to his daughter Luna in order to give her powers. Now Pedro thinks this is the best idea ever and that he's solved it. So he opens a clinic in Mutant Town to restore everybody's powers, and this resulted in many losing their lives due to the powers of the Terrigen Mists. And Pietro had to live with that on top of everything else that he already had to live with. The guy just can't catch a break. Number 3, too close for comfort. We go now to the Ultimate X-Men series. Okay, so since the twins were a big deal in the Brotherhood, they were very dedicated to the cause. And when it comes to the Ultimates, they got a little too dedicated to said cause. In 2001, the Ultimate pair is when things got a little weird in the comics. So one of the Ultimates front cover made readers do a double take with the duo side by side, hand in hand, with their fingers interlocked. Not even like this, like how Friends do it. It's like, you know. Yeah, the writers decided to give them a romantic relationship, you know, just to mix it up a little bit. Why not? They were always pretty close from their first issue. I mean, even Pietro told Toad that he was chewing too loud in front of his sister, so that was fine. But then it's when this came into the picture, things got weird. When Mark Miller brought them over to the Ultimates, it got a little crazy, and he was pretty defensive about Wanda to Captain America because, well, Cap was suggesting Wanda wears less revealing clothes to make an example, all because Captain America was suggesting that Wanda was a little bit scandally clad for the job. But when Quicksilver backs her up, it's more of a romantic way, which I feel like we could all have gotten without, you know, we don't want to see this version of Quicksilver, I don't think. Bring back the zombie one. I mean, anything's better than this weird thing. Even Captain America's face in that comic, he's like, oh. Now this also happened to end with Quicksilver unable to catch bullets fired at Wanda, and then one of those bullets ripped through his hand, taking out his lover slash sister. I mean, sure, that's one way to write somebody out of a relationship. Number 2, he lost his powers. When Wanda lost control of her powers during the House of M storyline, she was taken in by Magneto, who had asked Xavier for his help. So the Avengers and the X-Men met up to try and figure out a solution here. So at this meeting, they had talked about ending Wanda's life in order to ensure nobody else gets hurt or wiped out. So Quicksilver heard about this idea and ran to tell Magneto, but Magneto even thought, you know, maybe they're right. Maybe this is the best case. So Quicksilver went and convinced Wanda to use her powers in tandem with Xavier's telepathy to warp reality and create this new world where everybody is happy. This world being led by Magneto, with the twins literally being royalty. This world eventually started crumbling when Layla Miller used her powers and several heroes began remembering real life. They believed Magneto to be responsible, but they ended up tracking it down to Quicksilver and how it was his idea in the first place for Wanda to do this. So Magneto lashes out at the twin and Wanda restored reality, but this time with most of the mutants depowered, including her brother Quicksilver. And finally, number 1, dead and back again. In that House of M storyline, we see a mentally unstable Wanda Maximoff, and she created this new world where mutants are now the main bread and butter, and humans are the minority. Magneto, upon first realizing how this happened, Desmond blames Quicksilver for convincing Wanda to change reality. So he lashed out and crushes Quicksilver with the body of a Sentinel. Now he did this to get back at Pietro for abusing his dream, and then Scarlet Witch showed up and quickly revived her brother. But the fact that Magneto chose to strike down his own son, I mean, that idea lasts forever, no matter which reality.
Number 10, getting his memories back. I mean, this is one of the worst and best things to happen to Bucky when you think about it. He pursued his memories for a long time after losing them to brainwashing, but at the same time, they gave him a pretty huge amount of guilt, as he also remembered everything he had done, the person he used to be, but also the person he was shaped into becoming, against his will. It would often mean that we'd get a very different version of Bucky when he returned as the Winter Soldier after he remembered who he was, a much moodier version than the bright-eyed youngster who had been Captain America's confidant, pal, and sidekick. It would also mean that Bucky would often feel he wasn't worthy of certain tasks, titles, or even friendships, and that it would be hard for him to move forward and see himself as the hero that he could be. The hero he always had been before he was manipulated into being a villain that really he was not. Number 9, died in the snap. Oh, I didn't snap. Can't snap today. This is terrible. Don't give me the gauntlet today. Admittedly, not that bad, as all the heroes who died were returned to us once more when the Avengers finally managed to discover the secrets of time travel, used it to collect the stones, and managed to reassemble a version of the gauntlet, and undid what Thanos had done. But still, dying is never really a good time, I imagine, and all the death we experienced in Infinity War was still very tragic. Also, for a while, we didn't really know if it would end up being reversed. I mean, we hoped, we guessed, we assumed, but it was still unknown as to if it would end up being possible for our heroes to bring everyone back. So of course, Bucky is now back, and after Steve traveled back in time to settle down with Peggy, live his life out with her, and basically ended up retiring, the Winter Soldier returns to the screen to team up on Disney Plus with his partner and Cap's friend besides, Falcon, aka Sam Wilson. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, if you are enjoying this video and you want to see more videos like it and hear more cool stuff about Winter Soldier, be sure to show us you like it by giving it a thumbs up. Hey! Number 8, the death of his parents. Not only does Bucky have a tragic life following the events of World War II, but even before then, it was pretty sad. When he was only 10 years old, he found himself an orphan. His mother had died earlier on when he was younger, making Bucky not just an older brother to his sister, but also kind of a stand-in parent for her as well, with his father working most of the time to provide for the family. Later on, Bucky would lose his father too, who died in a tragic accident that took place during his basic training with the military. Bucky and his sister would ultimately be split up, and Bucky would end up convincing Camp Lehigh, where his dad had trained, to take him in as a ward of the state, with him going on to become the camp mascot, inspiring and later on even assisting the troops. Number 7, a man out of time. Like Captain America, Bucky is also considered a man out of time. While he was born in 1925, he now lives in the present day, meaning that many of his friends from his days when he was a camp mascot during the war times and pal of Captain America, or if we're talking the MCU serving in the war, are now all dead. Not only that, but like Steve, he's had to adapt to the progress of the modern day, adapting to living in a very different world from the one that he was born into. Granted, this may have been easier for Bucky considering he was at least around, at least periodically, throughout the passing years, and as such has at least seen some of the changes as they've happened. But of course, this timelessness could also be hard for him to adjust to, especially considering how much of the time in his life he spent being controlled by others and not really experiencing the world from his own point of view, but being manipulated by others to see it how they wanted him to see it. Number 6, death of Captain America. The supposed death. Anyways, Steve would later of course return, but yes, at the time, people thought that Steve Rogers was dead after he was shot through what looked to be the neck, yikes, and then later the gut, and yeah, anyways, he's fine, it's all fine. Bucky himself was initially believed to be the culprit, even by Falcon, and the two had a quick scuffle before Bucky explained he'd rather take his own life first before allowing himself to ever harm Steve. Aww. Bucky also then revealed that he was talking to the Nick Fury on comms and was only in the building that the sniper had sniped from because he was attempting to apprehend the person responsible, which then led to Falcon and Bucky teaming up to do so.
Number 5, arrested. Captain America Civil War is a staple in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The story that begins to unfold in that movie is still being worked out today in the MCU with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So when Sam Wilson tried to help Steve protect Bucky from Black Panther, it ends with them being arrested. And on top of being arrested, Cap got his shield taken away and Sam's wings were also taken. So when Zemo sneaks into the compound disguised as a psychologist, the power goes out and Sam is left to face off against the Winter Soldier without any of his gear. And it doesn't last too long. In fact, none of the Avengers last too long, but Steve was thankfully able to stop him. The whole Sokovia Accords thing made it very hard for them to suit up and start blowing up the whole building. Now, without his wings, the Falcon couldn't fly and would have to catch a super soldier on feet, regular human feet. Odds are you're not going to succeed. He's actually quite great at being a sleeper agent. And he didn't succeed. Nice try, Sam. Your heart's in the right place at least, so that's cool. Number 4, Marvel Zombies. In Marvel Zombies 3, issue 2, we see Falcon and, well, he's not around for too long, thankfully. I know this sounds weird, but hear me out. So Earth 2149 is a universe I hope to never see with my own eyes because it's terrifying. All of our heroes are zombified, they're zombies. It's gory, it's hopeless, and we're actually gonna get some sort of zombie episode for Disney's What If series coming to Disney+. So maybe we'll see this horrible version of Falcon, but hopefully not, because ooh. So Sam received a call from Nick Fury about this terrible world issue, and at this point heroes and villains have put their past aside because now it's go time. He doesn't last long in human form because when Beast and Reed Richards find a large stash of meat in Latveria, a zombie Falcon swoops in with a horde of other zombies. So Zombie Falcon returned to New York, and then when Machine Man and Jocasta arrived, all these flying zombie supers attacked, Falcon of course being one of them. Now alongside him we also have Beak, Angel, and Vulture. Falcon got a hold of Jocasta's leg, robot leg I might add, and she got payback by blasting his head off with her laser eyes. So not Sam's finest hour, that's for sure. Number 3, Chased War Machine. One of the biggest holy shit moments from Captain America Civil War was when Rhodey went down at the end of the airport battle. This was a moment where the audience wasn't actually sure if he had survived or not, and to this day he's still working out his paralysis. So what happened again? Well, while Ant-Man, well rather Giant Man, distracted the rest of the gang, Captain America and Bucky Barnes had made it to the Quinjet while War Machine and Iron Man were flying behind them trying to get them to stop. So Falcon flew in to help Cap and Buck by launching missiles to distract War Machine, and when Vision shot a laser beam out of the Mind Stone, Falcon quickly reacted by tucking in his wings and free falling out of the way. But that laser had to go somewhere and it went right through Rhodey's arc reactor. So Sam and Tony flew down as fast as they could to try and catch him, but it was no hope as Rhodey slammed into the ground. Falcon begins to apologize to Tony, but Tony doesn't say a word. He instead hits Sam with a repulsor shot. And the next we see of Sam is when he's locked up with the rest of the Avengers who chose the wrong side on the raft. Sad times. Number 2, he quit being Captain America. So back in 2015, Captain America was Sam Wilson. It was a good time, mostly. See, Steve had given him the shield, and then in the second issue of Captain America Sam Wilson, Sam got into it with shield over some leaked information that had shield creating its own version of the Cosmic Cube. So Sam wasn't on board with this, so he quit working for the government, and he pulled back to just instead being a friendly neighborhood Captain America. Then shield went ahead and made this new Cosmic Cube, Kobik, which actually made Steve Rogers young again, and his superpowers were topped off as well. So they both were working as Captain America. Now we have 2. 2 is better than 1. Isn't this glorious? This is so good. Which was great for a while, but come issue 21, the world had viewed Sam in a negative way, so he quit. He was like, yeah, f you guys, I'm out of here. He quit until the Secret Empire storyline concluded, you know, with the real Steve Rogers coming back from the cube after he defeated his evil self, all that jazz. But even afterwards, he returned the shield yet again to let Steve inspire the world himself, which is super similar to what I think is currently happening in the MCU with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because at the end of episode 1, we meet Number 1, The Replacement. At the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier episode 1, right before the credits, we see a pretty shocking announcement. We see the government announce a new symbol of hope, a new Captain America. And there he is, wearing the same suit, rocking the same shield, not Falcon. But instead a new guy, this guy named US Agent. Wyatt Russell is playing this character in the MCU. His name is John Walker, and the character first came into comics with Captain America issue 323. He actually started off opposed to Captain America. He was one of those guys who like stage fights, made himself look better, and then he took on the alias Super Patriot, and then finally he went to the new Captain America. This guy isn't the most gentle in the comics, so it may seem like a good choice for the government and how the current state of the world post-blip is. It might get quite ugly. Number 10, One Less Eye. That's right, kicking off the list at number 10, we have a Spider-Man moment that gives me goosebumps every time I see it. We start now with Spider-Man, The Other, Evolve or Die, where we see Spider-Man get his eye ripped out. Yeah, Moreland put Spider-Man through quite the battle, but ultimately it ended with his eye being a midnight snack. Spider-Man even compared being hit by Moreland to being hit by the Incredible Hulk, saying how he's never been hit so hard in his life. He has no idea it's about to get so much worse. And before we continue, if you guys haven't done so already, please make sure to go ahead and give us a like, because it helps us out a bunch here at the studio. It's this one. Thanks a lot. Okay, now back to Peter Parker's awful life. Number 9, Man Spider. We've all wished at some point or another that we could have Spider-Man's powers. I mean, the wall crawling alone I would take. So useful. But what if you got more than you bargained for power-wise? Well, in Spider-Man Disassembled, we see this in a pretty gross way. Peter starts to become an actual spider, starting with growing an extra set of peepers. Yeah, so that's disgusting. But wait, there's more. He ends up becoming an actual spider. Yeah, so after being injected with this goop from the Spider Queen, not only does he grow some extra eyes, but he also gives birth to another Peter Parker. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So out comes Peter, and he's the same Peter Parker as before, but a little stronger, with maybe a hint of PTSD sprinkled in there. But that's not particularly new to Peter. Bonus points to Peter also for attending a wedding with the 2 extra eyes and not being noticed. Gotta love Star Trek themed weddings. Get away with everything. Number 8, Venom. Making its debut in Amazing Spider-Man 299, next up on the list we have the introduction of Venom. Venom is a symbiote from the Clintar race, and after making its way to Earth, it eventually wound up in the hands of course, Spider-Man. So this dark symbiote started to make Spider-Man's life better. I mean, he got a cool haircut, started standing up for himself, and the suit made him stronger. It just felt better. But this didn't last too long because the symbiote found its ideal host shortly after Peter ripped it off, and that being Edward Brock. Eddie had visited Our Lady of Saints Church to beg God for forgiveness before ending his own life. And then this alien symbiote bonded with him mentally and physically. Like I said, at this time Peter was there trying to get rid of the symbiote because it was doing more bad than good in his life. Now, because it had originally bonded with Spider-Man, he basically is another Spider-Man, kind of. He gets the same powers Spidey used and also some of the same memories. It's actually why Eddie Brock knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Fun little fact. This ended up creating one of Spider-Man's best villains, and we get to see Tom Hardy reprise the role of Venom in the not so near future. Number 7, Tony Stark's death. With rumors swirling around about the next Spider-Man movie being one within the multiverse, it's only fair to go back and look at some of the sad themes of Spider-Man Far From Home, with of course being the death of Tony Stark. So right off the bat, we see Peter struggling with the weight of the world, having everybody look at him as the new leading Avenger. With most of our other Avengers off-world, Spider-Man facing Mysterio couldn't have been more grueling. This poor kid even gets slammed by a train at one point. It's easy to say this is a time where Peter could for sure go without. Reconnecting with lost friends, dealing with much older classmates like bad boy Brad, who doesn't make the first year back in school easy for Peter at all. That plus Tony Stark's inventory just being handed off to him, that's a lot of responsibility. The kid's going through a lot of pressure and puberty too. I mean, probably. What a combo. And number 6, the affair. Gwen and Norman's affair, to be specific. This is an absolute nightmare of an issue, so of course we're throwing it in here. We go now to Sins Past, which was this 5-part story that revealed that Gwen Stacy had actually had an affair with Norman Osborn. And they had kids named Gabriel and Sarah. So he meets them in a pretty wild way. We're introduced to these 2 twin characters, these new mysterious characters, and one of them really resembles Gwen Stacy, like by a lot. So Spider-Man 509, this begins, and it starts with a letter from a dead Gwen Stacy. So Peter starts to analyze the situation and the letter, and eventually finds out the secret that even Mary Jane knew about. So 7 months before Gwen's death, she gave birth to these twins with Norman. But because of Norman's blood, they aged a lot faster. And this wasn't taken too well by comic book fans, as this was written out pretty fast. Still an awful time for Peter, I'd say. I mean, even Mary Jane knew about it the whole time. So many secrets, so little time. Number 5, Doc Swap. This is a body swapping story that might make you pretty uncomfortable. So we go now to the Amazing Spider-Man 700, where we find a dying Dr. Otto Octavius. So Octavius switches bodies with Spider-Man, so that Spider-Man would die in his body and then he would live on inside the body of a superhero and do some good. Not a bad plan. Now the best part of this is that Peter was still inside, a little bit. He was able to remain inside the body and could only communicate with the new webhead, Otto Octavius. It's like your subconscious just talking to you the whole time. It was pretty neat to see this version of Spider-Man as well, and after a few minutes with the new, younger, healthier body, donned himself the new name, the Superior Spider-Man. And number 4, parents are back? Yeah, this one's pretty neat. So right off the cover of this, we see the text, "The most cataclysmic events of Spider-Man's life begins in this issue." And that's probably enough to pull you into the issue. I mean, come on. So we find out that Peter's parents have returned from the dead. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, we meet them again. Peter comes home and Aunt May's like, hey, I'm here with our new guests. And Peter's like, oh, new guests, those are always fun. Are those my parents? Yes, Peter's parents had returned from the dead. Well, rather they had never died to begin with. Let me explain. So they went on to explain how they were alive and working for Red Skull in secret for years. Only it was later revealed that they were evil androids the whole time. So his robo-parents were actually collecting some intel about Peter to give back to Chameleon. Chameleon created these fake parents for Green Goblin. So many lies. Just a web of lies. Spider-Man web of lies. Now we get it. And number 3. Gwen Stacy's death. This one left average moviegoers stunned in theaters when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 hit the big screen. We finally see the death of Gwen Stacy, and it's beautiful. So of course this comes from the comics, specifically in issue 121 of The Amazing Spider-Man. The Green Goblin ends up dropping her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and although Peter has his trusty webs, sometimes the angle just doesn't quite work out, and Gwen's neck ended up snapping from the momentum. So this happened in the movie as well, and Eagle Eye fans could spot the clock tower in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 striking 12:10, which references issue 121. And the way the web shot out like a hand too, I mean, really? Right in the heart. This scene's amazing. I mean, of course it's really sad, but the music, the way it's shot, really drives this part home. I mean, it's sad that this scene was one of the last ones we got from Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man run. Sure, the movies weren't as good as the new installments, but it would have been nice to see where this Spider-Man went after this dark moment. Would have been pretty dark. We'll never know. I mean, maybe multiverse stuff. We'll see. And number 2, identity not so secret. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, you were treated to a pretty sweet teaser. So of course we see J.K. Simmons reprise his role of J. Jonah Jameson in what starts out as a pretty comical scene. Now of course we're happy to see him back in this Spider-Man universe, but he comes bearing bad news. He ends up showing leaked footage from the final battle with Mysterio, and in the footage we see him shout out Spider-Man by his secret identity, Peter Parker, and a nice little photo to go along with it too. Now this isn't the first time this has happened. Back in the comics before the Civil War storyline, Peter takes a page out of Tony's book and reveals his secret identity to the world. And after that, things go south quite fast, including a hired gun setting his aim on Aunt May. And finally, number 1, you guessed it, Uncle Ben's death. Of course we have to include this in the list and save it for last. We had to sit through this in theaters like numerous times. And that's for good reason. One of the biggest moments of Peter Parker's life was when his Uncle Ben died. Now, after letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his uncle's life. So not only did Peter of course feel saddened by this very close loss, especially not having parents to begin with, but he was responsible for letting this guy get away. He honestly let it happen, and then in Amazing Fantasy issue 15, we see it all unfold. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1, and that means me." And cut to, bam.
Number 10, Batman lost all of his money. In the early days of the Joker War crossover, Joker stole all of Batman's money, an estimated $100 billion. In the process of stealing all Bruce Wayne's money, Joker also brought to light some issues with Batman's bookkeeping, specifically some problems with offshore accounts and dummy corporations, just extra cash he was stashing for Batman stuff, but he can't really tell the world that. Later on in the story, it's revealed that Lucius Fox is basically now in control of Wayne Enterprises, and the company's board even tries to remove Bruce from the company. Totally not a good idea. A similar thing happened in Spider-Man 2 with Oscorp, and the result was Green Goblin. I suppose these guys don't know about that though, because that was in the Marvel Universe. Whether you like the creative decision to mess with Batman's financial situation or not, you gotta admit it's definitely one of the worst things that could happen to a hero.
And before we move on here guys, don't forget to go ahead and give us a thumbs up because it helps us out so much in the studio. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for giving that a little tap tap of love. And we'll get on with the list now. Number 9, Spider-Man's identity revealed. If you stuck around until the very end of Spider-Man Far From Home, which you should have if you know any better, you were treated to a lovely little sweet teaser where we see J. Jonah Jameson returned by the amazing J.K. Simmons, but he's coming bearing bad news. He's like this TMZ conspiracy character, more of how he is in the Spider-Man games. He's a bit more hardcore than what we've already seen, and he reveals footage of Mysterio where we see him give a nice little shout out to Spider-Man, this time by his real name, with a cute little pic of Tom Holland to go along with it. Now, this isn't the first time Spider-Man's identity has been revealed out in the public. It actually happens quite a bit. But one notable time from the comics was in the Civil War storyline when Peter is convinced by Tony to reveal his secret identity to support the Superhuman Registration Act, resulting in Aunt May getting shot. Yeah, that's what happens when your biggest, baddest villains learn your last name. You get a lot of trouble coming your way. That's why we do our secret names on the internet.
Number 8, the Hulk, last man on Earth. In Hulk: The End, a one-shot from 2002, we see the Hulk as the last man alive at the end of the Earth. That's definitely gotta be one of the worst things that could happen to anybody, superhero or not. We see Banner wandering the post-apocalyptic wasteland, being followed by a vidbot that records his every move as Banner or as the Hulk. It's super bleak and depressing, watching an old and frail Bruce Banner watch the green sunset every evening and wander the desert. He reviews the vidbot after each transformation, and in one really gruesome part of the story, we see Hulk after having battled a giant swarm of flying cockroaches all melted away, and he's regenerating, but his skin and innards are all melted away and stuff. It's disgusting. Basically, the Hulk is getting attacked by these swarms of bugs that just eat his flesh until they're satisfied. This horrible experience is also pretty much the only thing left for the Hulk to fight against. The story sort of centers around this, with this inner conflict of Bruce Banner wanting to die, but the Hulk just won't let him and can't help wanting to fight. It's really tragic and totally conflicted. Like, man, who would want to be the last man on Earth?
Number 7, Barbara Gordon. The Killing Joke, written by Alan Moore, released in 1988, was and still is a fan favorite when it comes to graphic novels. It touches on the background of the Joker while he straight up torments the Gordon family all at the same time. It's a great story. And one of the biggest moments is, of course, when Barbara Gordon opens the door expecting to see her friend Colleen, when in fact it is a gun-wielding Joker that greets her instead. It's super dark. I mean, she's bound to a wheelchair after this, not to mention the trauma that goes along with it. I can't even imagine. Things started to at least look up for Barbara as she went on to become Oracle, the genius super hacker that kept an eye on Gotham and helped out all the supers, and even at one point became the leader of the Birds of Prey. Ah, we love a comeback story.
Number 6, Wolverine, torn in half by the Hulk. This one comes from Wolverine vs. Hulk, and it's pretty brutal. In this story, Wolverine is sent off to Tibet to assassinate the Hulk. The only problem being it's the Hulk we're talking about. When the battle between these two rageaholics gets super intense, Hulk picks Wolverine up and literally rips him in two, tossing his lower half up the mountain and leaving Wolverine's torso bleeding in the snow. Being the world's greatest tracker, Wolverine could smell his legs a few miles up the mountain, and he sets off on a long climb to retrieve his lost limbs. What's worse is this series was promptly struck with a delay that lasted forever, leaving poor old Wolverine legless for basically 3 years while we all waited for the next issue to come out.
Number 5, Batman's broken back. One of the biggest moments in The Dark Knight Rises comes from the pages of Batman issue 497, released back in 1993. So this was when we first met Bane in the comics, okay? Right during the Nightfall story arc. And he had just released every villain from Arkham Asylum, causing chaos to erupt in the streets of Gotham City. So poor Batman had to round up these super maniacs and throw them back in the slammer, but of course that's a pretty tiring job. So Bane expected this. In fact, he actually counted on it in order to strike the Dark Knight. See, Bane had found out Batman's identity and went over to his Batcave himself to settle the score. What a surprise. All these surprise door opens with paralyzing effects. Here we go. So the entire issue is basically Bane throwing Batman around, just one hit after another. It's brutal. And then finally Bane grabbed Batman, explains out loud to Bruce how he could kill him, but then death would only end his agony and silence his shame. So instead, he simply breaks his entire back. And that's the last page of the issue. That's what they leave you on. You do this, and then you just see barcodes, and you're like, no way, no way.
Number 4, Spider-Man, a passenger in his own body. In the Superior Spider-Man, Peter's body is taken over by Dr. Octopus. Otto indeed does make for a superior Spider-Man, but he's definitely more cold, calculated, and bitter than good old Pete. The awful thing about this is Peter Parker is still alive somewhere inside of the body and can do nothing but watch as Otto dates his girlfriend MJ, builds up his company Parker Industries, and even alienates him from his friends with his new attitude and negative banter. Pete has to bear witness to it all, trapped in his own body, watching the course of his life go off in a new direction. Luckily, it's all kind of retconned and straightened out in the end, but man, definitely a troublesome time for Spidey.
Number 3, Tim Drake's torture. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker animated film created by Tim and Paul Dini. We see the Joker and Harley kidnap Robin, okay? They kidnap him, they scoop him up off the streets while Tim was out one night patrolling the streets by himself, of course, as most heroes do, and then he sees a lady in trouble. This was of course the bait, and Tim sadly took it. It was all a setup, and it worked. So the Joker then trapped him and took him to Arkham Asylum, where he tortured him. I mean, the Joker straight up tortured him for 2 weeks. Yeah, this wasn't like an overnight thing. He didn't take a couple of fingers off. It's not like Ozark. This was 2 weeks of mental torture. He was brainwashed until eventually he gave up all these secrets about Batman. And then he eventually became this evil mini version of the Joker in the process, with the help of brainwashing and a microchip that carries the Joker's memories and consciousness with it. And as we see from other cases, brainwashing isn't a one and done event. Like Bucky Barnes, for example, he struggles with it constantly, like his life is over. But luckily Terry McGinnis ended up freeing Tim Drake, and then Tim went back to normal. But ooh, that therapy bill is gonna be hot. That's gonna be around for a while.
Number 2, Cyclops suffocates in a cube. When we first started this list, this scene was the first thing that I thought of. In Marvel's original Infinity Gauntlet storyline, after Thanos' universe-altering snap, the remaining Avengers head off into space to do battle against him. One of them is Cyclops, and in the scenes that follow, we see Thanos conjure an unbreakable cube around Cyclops' head, right when he is using an optic blast. Helpless, he falls to the ground, suffocating, as the heroes all around also fall to Thanos' incredible power. It's not only a devastating defeat, but almost an embarrassing and humiliating loss for the leader of the X-Men. A lot of heroes go down pretty fast up against Thanos, but it's the slow nature of Cyclops' death, just suffering in the background of the next few panels, that really drives this one home. Definitely one of the worst things to happen to a superhero.
And finally, number 1, you probably guessed it, Spider-Man gets his eye eaten. Okay, so this is perhaps one of the worst things that I can imagine. Like, I've seen Saw, I've seen all those movies. This is close. This is definitely close. Every time something happens with eyeballs, I always get goosebumps all over my shit. Okay, so in the Spider-Man storyline, The Other, Evolve or Die, we see Spider-Man go toe-to-toe with Morlun, and he gets his ass kicked. It gets so hard that Spider-Man actually breaks his knuckles while he's fighting. That's how intense this battle is. Okay, so things quickly go from bad to worse when Morlun decides to grab Spidey's left eye and pull it right out. No, he didn't, Spider-Man says. Oh, yes, he did, my friend. He pulled his eyeball out, and then to make us feel even more sick, Morlun eats it, even commenting how delicious it was. What a lovely meal. Nutritious and delicious, I must say. Don't forget to tip your server.
Number 10, beat up by Batman. Superman isn't the kind of guy who takes a beating lying down. So to lose to a guy without superpowers must have been pretty embarrassing for him. In the 1986 miniseries, The Dark Knight Returns, this is exactly what happens. After Superman becomes weakened due to a nuclear explosion, Batman uses a mechanical exoframe to get an edge in hand-to-hand combat. An elderly Green Arrow shoots Superman with kryptonite, greatly weakening him, and Batman just pounces. Batman later reveals that he spared Superman by not using more kryptonite and threatens Superman to stay out of his way, telling Superman to always remember that he beat him. If that wasn't enough, Batman also dies from a heart attack after. Later we reveal that it was staged, but still, this must have been a roller coaster ride for comic book fans when it first appeared. Before I reveal number 9, take a second to hit that like button and join the notification squad so you don't miss any more top 10 nerd videos. Now back to Superman's suffering. Number 9. his home planet exploded. As you probably already know, Superman is an alien from the planet Krypton, sent off in a capsule that spared him as his home planet exploded into smithereens. It's definitely gotta be one of the worst things that's happened to him. I mean, not only is his home planet gone, and he becomes a space orphan at like the youngest possible age, right after birth, but because of this, he also believes for a long time that he's the last surviving member of his race. Of course, we do meet other Kryptonians throughout Superman's story, but I can't imagine what it must have been like for him, wondering what once was. He never even got to see what the planet he came from was like in its prime. It's a tragedy for sure, but it's also one of the details that makes Superman seem so noble and self-sacrificing. Earth is his home now, and we're happy to have him. Number 8. He almost made a sex tape? In 1986, scripting for Superman comics was taken over by a writer named John Byrne. He made some pretty good changes, including keeping Superman's parents alive, removing the Fortress of Solitude, and removing some of the more cheesy stuff, making Superman more outgoing and heroic. More proactive, if you will. Anyway, he also made some really weird changes, like creating a villain named Sleaze. Yeah, that's right, Sleaze. He's a perverted alien, shunned from his home planet of Apocalypse and stranded here on Earth. Hoping to save some money and build an army, he mentally influences Superman into almost making a sex tape with his fellow superhero, Big Barda. And it almost happens too, but luckily her husband, Mr. Miracle, arrives and he just shuts the whole thing down. It's the kind of story that leaves you stunned. Honestly, I couldn't believe what I was reading, but I guess when you're the oldest superhero around, you're gonna get into some weird storylines eventually. It's worth noting that Sleaze was a notoriously unpopular villain and eventually dies in an explosion. Number 7. Beat himself up over Lois Lane's death. When you experience tragedy, it's important that you don't blame yourself for what happened. However, in the Infinite Crisis storyline, Superman has a really hard time with this. After hearing a scream from over in Earth 2 and flying there, Superman found that Earth's version of Superman standing over the body of Earth 2 Lois Lane, who had just died. Our Superman lashes out, blaming the other Superman for her death, and the two engage in a massive epic fight all across Metropolis. Man, it's bad enough causing all this collateral damage fighting a supervillain, but who foots the bill for the fight when it's Superman in each corner? The fight is eventually stopped when Wonder Woman shows up and she grabs Superman with her lasso. She helps Superman see that it's really Lex Luthor that's been pulling the strings behind the scenes. Number 6. Had an identity crisis. In the Superman Grounded storyline, Superman is 700 issues deep, and he feels like he's lost touch with humanity. Seriously, it's issue number 700. The solution? He decides to walk across the country on foot and get back to his roots as a hero, helping people with their everyday problems. He passes through Detroit and fixes the employment crisis, repairing factories with alien technology, and in Chicago he rescues a young boy from an abusive father and tries to reinforce that powers are not required to be a hero. He later meets the new Wonder Woman and has lunch with the Flash in Colorado. It's an emotionally grounded story with plenty of the kind of moralizing that comics are known for. He eventually comes to the conclusion that his Superman identity is unnecessary and he could do more operating in secret. But later, he overcomes his depression and embraces his legacy, creating the Superman Squad, embodying the values of truth, justice, and the American way. Number 5. Brainiac killed his Earth dad. Superman has a seriously lengthy history. In Action Comics number 867, Superman discovers a Brainiac drone outside of the Daily Planet and discovers that Brainiac is still somewhere out there, and all the previous encounters with him were actually just one of Brainiac's probes. Superman flies all over the galaxy, seeking Brainiac to try to track him down, and during the search, he's eventually captured and taken aboard Brainiac's ship. As Superman comes to, he learns how Brainiac has been traveling the galaxy, shrinking civilians down and bottling them. He plans to bottle the Earth, but with the help of Supergirl, Brainiac is soon defeated. He has one last trick up his sleeve, however. He learns where Superman's parents live by reading his mind while he's unconscious and launches a missile at the Kent family farm. Luckily, nobody dies in the explosion, but Jonathan Kent actually has a heart attack soon after, and we later see Superman at the funeral, devastated. Number 4. Got replaced by these 4 losers. When Superman died, DC Comics saw an opportunity and created 4 new Supermen, and it was weird. The 4 new characters were based on variations of Superman's slogans: the Man of Steel, the Man of Tomorrow, the Metropolis Kid, and the Last Son of Krypton. The Man of Steel and the Kid, however, are the only ones who actually become heroes. And after some time, the original Superman returns from beyond the grave, and he has to defeat Cyborg Superman and a lethal alien Superman. It must have been really bizarre for comic fans at the time, but imagine how Superman must have felt being replaced 4 times over. Thankfully, he eventually returns to remind the city what a real Superman can do. Number 3. Killed fighting Doomsday. The death of Superman was an epic comic book event in 1993 and even received coverage in the mainstream media. Superman meets his fate at the hands of Doomsday. Doomsday is a rampaging, seemingly mindless monster, a muscular humanoid with bones protruding from his skin. The epic battle causes massive destruction across Metropolis, epically featured in the comic in large splash pages. The creators wanted to show that Superman was not actually invincible and that kryptonite was not his only weakness. This was an epic event. Writers had to sign non-disclosure agreements to keep Superman's death a secret, and Superman comics were delayed for 3 months to help push the illusion that Superman really was dead. Yes, it seems dying is one of the worst things to happen to Superman as a person, but as a character, it likely made him more popular than ever, as in the comics, Superman's death is only the beginning of a much larger story, and he makes a huge comeback. Number 2. Killed a pregnant Lois Lane. In an alternate reality, as part of the Injustice storyline, Superman suffers a real tragedy. After the Joker uses a fear toxin on Superman, he gets all whacked out and he believes he's fighting Doomsday, and he does what Superman does and takes him off up into space to kill him. The fear toxin wears off and Superman sees that it's actually Lois Lane, floating dead in the void of space along with their unborn child. If that wasn't bad enough, Joker has also remotely linked a bomb to Lois's heartbeat, and as soon as it stops beating, the bomb explodes, destroying Metropolis. This makes Superman go buck wild, and he breaks his vow to never kill, punching his arm through Joker's chest and killing him instantly. Now this was an alternate universe, but it's still one of the lowest points for Superman. And now, number 1. He died. Again. Zack Snyder's Batman vs Superman was controversial for many reasons, including Superman's death. Superman is feared and revered by the city for his godlike power, and Batman has a vision that makes him realize he better do something about it before Superman becomes too powerful. Batman nearly kills Superman using a kryptonite spear, but after hearing Superman tell him to save Martha, Batman realizes Superman isn't really a threat and he heads out to save Martha. While he's doing this, Superman confronts Luthor, who unleashes the monstrous Doomsday to fight for him. Batman and Superman fight against Doomsday together, but they're totally outmatched as Doomsday can absorb and redirect energy. Realizing that they shared Kryptonian DNA, Superman grabs the spear and stabs Doomsday with it, but not before being impaled on one of Doomsday's bony spikes and dying. Later, we see Batman reveal his plan to form the Justice League, and as the film ends, we see the dirt on Superman's grave begin to levitate. You just can't keep a good guy down. Number 10. He became the fattest man on Earth. This bizarre storyline is from 1960, and in it, the evil Gorilla Grodd has transferred his consciousness into human form to confront the Flash. He shoots Flash with a radiation gun that causes his body to absorb excess moisture from the air, making Barry swell up like a water balloon to an alarming and uncomfortable looking size. Not only that, Grodd also erases his memories and sells him to a heartless sideshow owner who puts Barry on display and charges people to come and see the fattest man alive. I can only imagine how cringy it would be to try and read this story today and take it seriously. We get to see a deeply depressed Barry, exploited, embarrassed, and dejected, with little kids pointing and laughing at him. Thankfully, he does eventually recover his memory and his figure. Hey guys, if you like these videos and you want to see more, be sure to take a second and hit that like button. Number 9. His face was disfigured. Not everything on this list is cosmetic, but we'll get into the more emotional suffering later. For now, let's talk about the time Big Sur punched the Flash's lights out. Big Sur is one of the Flash's lesser known villains, but he has some super strength and lands a clean, super powered blow right in Barry's face, and the signature speedster passes out in the bushes at the park. 2 kids happen across his body and recoil in horror when they take a peek under his mask. His face is so smashed up it's barely even recognizable. His teeth are chipped, his eyes swollen shut. It's brutal. Seriously hurt, he heads to Gorilla City and gets patched up by his friend Solivar, leader of the super intelligent gorilla race. They heal him up and rebuild his face differently to help keep his identity secret. Luckily, they go with the usual 2 eyes, 1 nose, regular looking face. In the future, advanced surgery helps Flash eventually return to the face that we know and love. Number 8. Almost burned to death. In the Flashpoint universe, Barry doesn't have his superpowers, so he works together with Thomas Wayne, that reality's version of Batman, to come up with a scheme to try to get his powers back, so that he can run back in time and fix the timeline. So the plan is simple: recreate the events that originally gave him his powers, by covering himself in chemicals and then getting struck by lightning. Thomas, for good reason, has a lot of concerns, but Barry races ahead with the plan, and it doesn't go well. He is struck by lightning, but instead of receiving powers, he almost roasts to death, getting 3rd-degree burns all over his body. Thomas bandages up what's left of Barry's skin while he screams in agony, and we see Barry lying on a gurney, soaked in blood and covered head to toe in bandages. It is a bit of a gruesome scene and definitely inspires some sympathy for the Flash. Number 7. Captured and tortured. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, a lot of things got really cranked up. Many heroes were pushed to their limits, and good old Barry is no exception. The Flash gets captured by the Anti-Monitor, and then mentally tortured by the evil Psycho Pirate, who has the ability to manipulate emotions. Barry endures this for weeks, with Psycho Pirate forcing him to relive his worst memories and emotions over and over again. We see poor Barry cowering in the dark, terrified for his life, forced to watch as his fellow Justice League member Red Tornado is killed right before his eyes. When he finally breaks free, he's been through so much emotional turmoil, he goes buck wild with rage and beats on Psycho Pirate until he begs for mercy. Definitely a low point for the Flash. Number 6. His wife Iris West was killed by Zoom. Since the first appearance of Barry Allen in 1956, he's been paired up with Iris West, another DC power couple like Lois and Clark. They've been married and had all kinds of relationship drama. While she's attending a costume party dressed as Batgirl, Zoom waits for her in the kitchen, and when she comes to get a drink, he kills her. Using his speed powers to vibrate his hand at turbo speed, he passes his hand through her skull and does fatal damage to the molecules inside her brain. This causes instantaneous death, and the tragedy of it all is devastating for Barry. Later in the story, his true love is brought back to him through some time travel stuff and reincarnation, but it's still a seriously heart-wrenching moment for the Flash. Number 5. He killed a man. After the death of his first wife, Barry eventually met and fell in love with Fiona Webb, and the two dated on and off. She worked for a senator named Creed Phillips on his election campaign. When Creed is revealed to secretly be the villain Eradicator and later dies, Fiona and Barry realize through the whole ordeal that they really do love each other and decide that they're going to get married. On the day of the wedding, the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, shows up again and attacks Barry. The two race across the city fighting each other, but when Zoom switches his focus to Barry's fiancée, Flash goes into a rage and he runs up and grabs him by the neck from behind. Unfortunately, the sheer force of this alone snaps the villain's neck and kills him, and Barry is racked with guilt over having killed someone. The city even has him stand trial, and his longtime friend Wally testifies against him, saying Flash should have done more to stop Zoom without killing him. It's a real low point for Barry, and he's forced to flee to another time period. Number 4. His nephew Wally died. If suffering all this physical and emotional pain wasn't bad enough, Barry has also seen the death of his beloved nephew Wally West. Wally and his aunt are driving, racing to stop Iris's brother from killing the Flash. They end up getting into a car crash on the way, and not wearing seatbelts, the results of the crash are pretty brutal. Iris is left permanently paralyzed, and Wally is thrown from the vehicle. Barry arrives to see Wally's lifeless body on the road, and Iris being loaded into an ambulance. Flash blames himself for not being able to stop the accident, and the death of Wally sends him into a dark period of sadness and guilt. Number 3. Parents dead. Things weren't always this way. Maybe it was the success of Superman or Batman stories, but either way, when DC rewrote the Flash's backstory in Rebirth, they gave him the old cliche tragic past. In this new version of his history, his mother Nora is brutally murdered when he's a child. Not only that, his father is wrongfully sent to prison for the crime. And if that wasn't bad enough, his father dies in prison before he can be proved innocent, and the Flash goes through it all alone. It's only later in life that he learns it was the Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom, that murdered Nora and framed his father Henry for the crime to ruin Barry's life. Ironically, the plan backfires, and these events lead to Barry becoming a forensic scientist for the police, and then later becoming the hero known as the Flash. Number 2, returns to the past and allows his mother's death. Alright, we've seen a lot of stuff. How could it possibly be worse? Well, one time, Barry woke up in an alternate reality where his mother is still alive. In the Flashpoint universe, his mother is alive and his father was never framed for murder. It sounds great and Barry gets a nice touching reunion, but there's actually a bunch of other stuff in this universe that's different too. Like Bruce Wayne was killed instead of his parents. On top of that, in this universe, Wonder Woman and Aquaman have basically caused a huge war in Europe, causing massive destruction and devastation. Barry decides he needs to reset the timeline, even though it means losing his mother again. Barry does do the heroic thing in the end and sacrifices his own happiness to put everything back to normal. Number 1, sacrificed himself to save the multiverse. In the crossover event Crisis on Infinite Earths, Barry makes the ultimate sacrifice, his own life. The Anti-Monitor has constructed a giant antimatter cannon to destroy the various Earths, and Barry does what he has to do to stop it. He runs against the antimatter to destroy the weapon, running so fast he's going back through time, reliving his memories as his body disintegrates. The pain becomes so intense at one point that he cries out for help with nobody to hear him. He reminds himself that there is always hope, and he keeps pushing even as his body is breaking down completely. He leaves us with a final message that we must save the world, and Barry Allen dies a hero. This version of him anyways.
Number 10. Robin the Vampire. Ever since I saw The Little Vampire with Jonathan Lipnicki, the Stuart Little kid,
Wow, it's great to be a vampire. We want to become humans, not eat them for dinner.
I've wanted to low-key be a vampire like every single day, whatever. But what if I told you that Robin turned into a vampire and it was all because of Batman? Yeah, we look now into the Batman and Robin Dracula trilogy, where Dick Grayson has become obsessed with killing Batman after he murdered his parents. Because, you know, the whole vampire thing. So he finds this Batman, literally half man, half bat, and he finds his crypt, and he just can't bring himself to kill Batman. He just can't do it. He's too much of a good person in there. So then Batman turns him into a vampire. Hey, if you can't beat him, join him. And before we go to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and toss this video a thumbs up down there, it would be great. It helps our channel out a lot. I'm in a closet right now. Like the video, it'll just do all good. It'll do wonders. Now back to this crazy list. Number 9, Bat Slapped. Okay, I'm gonna start this list off mostly with Dick's origin because it's quite crucial in some of these choices that he makes down the road, further on in this list. You kind of need to know that first. Following the tragic events of the Flying Graysons, Dick had to be sent away to a horrible juvenile service system due to the fact that social services were full. This wasn't an ideal home for a young child. He was beaten up by other kids. It was just not a place you want to be, to say the least. So it didn't take long for him to try and, of course, make a break for it. So during this getaway, he came across Batman, who talked to Dick and promised him that he wouldn't be there much longer in that horrible living situation. This turned out to be very true, seeing as shortly after he had a foster parent named Mr. Wayne, who says they both have a lot in common. So his luck's turned around, how amazing. So Batman is also the same guy who kicked him out of said new home in World's Finest issue 153. The Bat Slap, here we go. As if getting slapped by Batman wasn't bad enough, Bruce actually wiped Dick's memory and then sent him back to an orphanage. All because Dick thought Batman was in the wrong for trying to kill Superman. So next time you want to remind Batman that killing is, you know, still a bad thing, you might just get slapped across the face for it. So be careful. Tread lightly, Boy Wonder. Even if it's an imagination story, you're still gonna get slapped. Number 8, Dick Grayson got fired. If you've ever been fired from a job, first of all, it happens. Grab a milkshake on the way home, reflect a little, brush it off, you'll be all right. But that's, you know, getting fired by Batman, that's an L. You've taken a big L. But if you get fired by Batman, like, you can't even put that on a resume. That's just a huge empty spot. You can't tell anyone. Says here you did nothing for like 6 years. This is war, Dick. Robin is my second, my lieutenant. Anything less than total devotion to the cause is simply wasting my time. I'll say it again, you're fired. Oof, okay, Batman said that to me, my soul would crush. Every night I'd hear those words over and over in my head. Well, it all happens in Nightwing year 1. Bruce finds out that Dick has been working part-time for the Teen Titans, so he delivers that line. Fires him, because he's not totally committed. I mean, that's fair, but also, I mean, I know Batman's got his system going on, but like, that's a pretty good route that he's on. I mean, luckily Dick went on to become Nightwing, and the two of them work it out eventually as time goes on. But I feel like we could have salvaged lots of time and heartache for this poor kid. Number 7, fought by Robin? Robin fighting another Robin. Things are bound to get a little messy. Following Infinite Crisis, Brothers in Blood is a Nightwing storyline that's part of the 1 year later event. So Dick Grayson moves to New York and then he sees there's a Nightwing there.
That's suspicious.
And he's taking care of criminals, but only in a much more brutal way. I mean, like much, much darker. So who is this? What's going on here? Well, the suited up Dick Grayson is then approached by the crazier Nightwing, who turns out to be none other than, you guessed it, Jason Todd. So of course they fight and Dick Grayson is knocked off the building, and with Jason Todd of course bragging the whole time of how he's the best fighter ever and how the city loves him so much more in the way he's doing things, you know, with shooting and stabbing people rather than slapping some handcuffs on them. So the pair ended up fighting again after this, and Jason Todd won again. They ended up teaming together, but falling off a building and fighting each other was a bad day for not only one Robin, but both of them. I also love how Jason suited up in an old costume to just deliver the point even harder.
Give it up, bro.
Number 6, shot in the head. This one came out of nowhere, okay? So what started as a fun training exercise quickly turned into a very bad situation with Nightwing. So Batman issue 55, we see Nightwing and Batman patrolling Gotham City as usual. Nightwing playfully challenges Batman to a contest, you know, spice up the patrol a little bit, keep it fresh. And at first Batman isn't really on board, but eventually he's like, all right, let's do this, young blood. The game is, whoever shoots their grapple first as they're falling loses. So you gotta see who can get closest to the ground. How low can you go? Gotham edition. So they make the dive, and Nightwing technically wins. I mean, because Batman breaks early to attend to the bat symbol. Rules are rules. I mean, he still did win. That's a win. But the fun and games end quite early. So at the same time, Nightwing and Batman were talking to Jim Gordon. At this point, KG Beast was taking aim at Nightwing's head. And then just like that, the bullet grazes off Dick's head. And I don't mean graze like, oh, I think I got shot. I mean graze like it just didn't go through his head. That's the only difference. It got him good. So good that he wasn't the same afterwards. Fun grapple games and then minutes later, serious brain trauma. Sounds like a sidekick classic in the world of the Bat. Number 5, Tim Drake's torture. I'll begin with how I peeled back the layers of the boy's mind. Those are the very scary words of the Joker, and he says it in Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker animated film, created by Tim Gunn and Paul Dini. So we see the Joker and Harley kidnap Robin. Tim Drake was out one night patrolling the streets by himself, just doing what he does best, getting it done. Then, all of a sudden, he has to save a lady from 2 thugs. No problem. That's a cakewalk, or a walk in the park, or a walk in the cake, whatever you like to say. Turns out this was all a setup, and it worked perfectly. The Joker trapped him and then took him to Arkham Asylum, where he used shock therapy and serums, literally anything he could to break him. He tortured him for like 2 weeks straight. That's a long time. I've been working in his closet for 2 weeks. That's a very long time. I have a very good concept of how long time is in his closet. He was brainwashed until he eventually gave up all these secrets about Batman, but it gets even worse. Yeah, that's right. Joker ended up turning him into a mini Joker and gave him the appropriate name of JJ, Joker Jr.
You've lost, Batman.
Number 4, Stephanie Brown's death. So when Tim's father found out about his part-time gig as Robin, he was forced to retire. Meanwhile, Stephanie also broke it off with Tim Drake because she thought that he'd been sneaking around behind her back. She saw him talking to a girl at a locker and she was like, something looks weird here. A little bit of too much hip movements in the conversation. So she needed something else to focus on in her time. So she made a homemade Robin suit and snuck into the Batcave and demanded that Batman would make her the new Robin and train her. I like it. She's committed. Let's do it. So Batman's like, all right. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's party. So cut to several months of training, a new costume upgrade that matched the same design as Tim's costume. She's now rolling with B-Man. And the two worked well together. I mean, for a little while, because, you know, that's how these things go. Then she disobeyed orders on a couple of missions and was promptly also fired. No more suit. Get out of here. Beat it. Just like that. Like, this guy's ruthless. Now, this is where things, again, go from bad to worse. So because of this, Stephanie felt like she had to prove herself to Batman. Everybody's got to prove themselves and do crazy shit. So she took one of his plans for the Gotham underworld and tried to step up. This unfortunately led to the events of Batman War Games, where Stephanie was captured by Black Mask, she was tortured, and then sadly she died in a hospital with a regretful and failed Bruce Wayne by her side. Leslie Tompkins sure didn't help either. It was actually revealed that she had withheld a medical treatment that could have saved Stephanie. So in an attempt to make Bruce see the violence that he'd caused and hang up the mantle, she didn't give it to her. So dark. DC is so dark. She's like, you know what? I'm gonna let her die to teach you a lesson, because you haven't learned any lessons with death. you know? Yeah, you know, because Batman hasn't learned any lessons by people dying, for sure. He needed that lesson. He has no idea what that's like. Number 3, Damian Wayne's death. The 5th Robin in this list of Robins, Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne, he is the son of Batman and Talia al Ghul, which means he's now heir to both Batman, crime-fighting superhero, and also Ra's al Ghul's family, a not crime-fighting team. They're kind of the worst. That's a wild parent-teacher conference to have right there, first of all. So he worked alongside Dick Grayson, who at this point had replaced Batman, and he was perfect, like genetically speaking. His origin was unknown to Batman at this point. He was grown in this artificial womb, made to be a warrior by Talia in the League of Assassins. So he was already a well-established fighter when he was just a preteen. Wild. Talia had him spy on Bruce at first, and she actually left him with Bruce. Like, hey, you know, just trying to throw off his game. Like, hey, here's a kid, good luck. All the while, a cloned and older version of the Boy Wonder was made to cause chaos. Chaos that ended up impaling Damian and killing him instantly. But he put up an unreal fight. I mean, kicking the arrow through his back and then out of his chest, and then calling him a coward. Like, what a way to go out. Number 2, Jason Todd's death. So different than Dick Grayson, Jason Todd did the things the harder way. Like I just mentioned a couple times on this list, he had a pretty rough go, but nothing can be worse than the day of his death in A Death in the Family, written by Jim Starlin back in 1988. So we got to see the death of the second Robin, Jason Todd. So, for starters, this was a choice that readers had to make back in the day. Yeah, you could straight up call a number and vote for if you wanted this dude to die. So hats off, you guys did it. Awesome, great work. Do you feel good? You should feel good. So Batman had actually asked Barbara Gordon to come out of retirement to keep an eye on him during a couple of missions. But she saw this side of him, this dark, brutal, angry kid, and she warned Batman, rightfully so. So Jason was tracking this lead to find his real birth mother, who was actually being blackmailed by the Joker this whole time, and of course, to get his sticky hands on Robin. Yeah, the Joker had escaped Arkham Asylum, and Batman tracked him to Lebanon, where Jason was as well at the same time during his scavenger hunt for his mother. The Joker got his hands on Jason Todd and beat him to death. It's brutal. And then after the Joker's done, he even calls the site a bit messy. So he leaves Jason to die, and of course he sets off a bomb afterwards, just for good luck. Batman arrives far too late after the bomb had gone off, and he held the Boy Wonder's body in his arms, and it's one of the most iconic things you'll see on the cover of any comic book. So afterwards, he comes back as Red Hood to find that he's been replaced after his death by Tim Drake. Now it makes sense. So Batman considers this one of his greatest failures, not properly training Jason as Robin, and I agree. Number 1, Memory Lane. You know it's almost just as bad as being beaten to death and then blown up? It's gotta suck when you gotta go back there or just relive it again. Surprise, here's trauma. Remember this? This takes place in Batman and Robin issue 20. Batman and the Red Hood. So at this point, Jason and Batman are on the way to becoming closer again. The relationship is going well. It's on the up and up. So they head to a foreign country to fight crime. Sounds like another day for the duo. Then upon arrival, Jason Todd realizes that this is Ethiopia, the same place Joker dished out that beating I just talked about. Batman wants Jason to dig into his memories and see if anything comes back, anything that may lead to his resurrection, in order for Bruce to do the same for Damian Wayne. That's brutal. Hey, remember any of this? Any tips? Jason, of course, doesn't react too well at all, and then the two end up splitting again, after, of course, a brutal fight. The Flying Graysons. Of course, we have to start here, right at the beginning. When he was just 12 years old, Dick Grayson was a circus acrobat, and he was part of his family's act named the Flying Graysons of the Haley Circus. When they were on tour in Gotham City, Dick overheard crime lord Tony Zuko threaten the livelihood of the performers over extortion money. The owner refused, and then later that night, Dick had to watch his parents fall to their deaths due to a wire snap. So he grew up, of course, feeling responsible for his parents' death. Similar to Bruce Wayne's origin, this was just the beginning. And before we head over to number 9, guys, if you could go ahead and give us a thumbs up down below, because it helps out the channel so much, you have no idea. You guys are the best ever. Thank you so much for watching and being part of the team. Now back to number 9. Number 9, bullied. So following the tragic events of the Flying Graysons, Dick had to be sent away to a horrible juvenile service system due to the fact that social services were full. This wasn't a great place by any means. I mean, he was beaten up by other kids. I mean, talk about things going from bad to worse. First, he has to watch his parents die, and then he gets put in a place that he desperately tries to escape after not being there long at all. Poor kid. So during this first attempted getaway, he came across Batman, who talked to Dick and promised him that he wouldn't be there much longer. Now this turned out to be true, seeing as shortly after, he had a foster parent named Mr. Wayne, and he says they both have a lot in common. Number 8, Robin vs. Robin. Following Infinite Crisis, Brothers in Blood is a Nightwing storyline that's part of the 1 year later event. So Dick Grayson moves to New York, and then he sees another Nightwing is there, and he's taking care of criminals in a much more nasty, brutal way. I mean, like, much, much darker. So who could this be? The suited up Dick Grayson is then approached by the fake Nightwing, who turns out to be none other than Red Hood, Jason Todd. So of course they fight and Dick Grayson is knocked off of a building, with Jason Todd of course preaching how much more the city of New York liked his take on the Nightwing mantle. You know, with shooting and stabbing New York's criminals, you know, rather than putting them in jail and not shooting or stabbing said criminals. So the pair ended up fighting again and Jason Todd won again. The two ended up teaming together, but I mean, seeing Robin versus Robin, that's one we don't get sick of seeing. Number 7, he got fired. Getting fired is the worst, especially if you're a super crime fighter, okay? This is war, Dick. Robin is my second, my lieutenant. Anything less than total devotion to this cause is simply wasting my time. I'll say it again, Dick. You're fired. Get out of my cave. And cue the dramatic music. The tribe has spoken. Get out of here. So Robin, aka Dick Grayson, came back as Nightwing in 1984 after he was fired from the role of Robin. See, initially Batman decided that he wasn't fitting for the role. So in Nightwing Year 1, Part 1 of 6, we see this unfold back at the cave where Bruce delivers the 2 words that echoed in his head. You're fired. Well, as the issue says, one door closes and another one opens. Number 6, he gets sent to an orphanage. So while I previously mentioned how Batman got Dick out of a hostile living situation with other kids, Batman is also the same guy who would kick him out in World's Finest issue 153. So although it's an imagination story, we still got to see the birth of a popular meme. The bat slap. As if getting slapped by Batman wasn't bad enough, Bruce actually wiped Dick's memory and sent him to an orphanage. All because Dick thought Batman was in the wrong for trying to kill Superman. See, sometimes taking the high road just gets you slapped. It's, you know, it's part of the hero gig.
Number 5, having Magneto for a father. At least for the time she did. While in the comics, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are no longer considered the children of Magneto, they still had him as a father for many years, and across many alternate Earths as well. While Magneto might be good with magnetizing, he is not very good at parenting. Magneto is usually a pretty strict father who has demanded much from his children over the years. I think Wanda, in terms of having a caring parent, was actually better off with her sentient cow mom that the High Evolutionary created. Number 4, spell backfired. Even when Wanda tries to do good, she can't catch a break. In the X-Men Empire series tie-in, Scarlet Witch seeks to right her wrongs by bringing back all those mutants lost in the massacre at Genosha. She is trying to atone for her past and all the harm that she has brought to mutant kind. But poor Wanda can't seem to catch a break. Her ritual to revive the dead backfires and instead simply turns those that she's trying to bring back into zombie mutants, instead of bringing them, you know, fully back to life. To make matters worse, we later find out that Doctor Strange warned her against trying to make amends for her sins this way, telling her she couldn't do what had already been done. This made Wanda think that she simply needed to shift her focus instead of realizing that she needed to actually forge new paths as opposed to undoing old tragedies. Number 3, Vision's death. Going back to the MCU for a moment, one of the worst things that happened to Elizabeth Olsen's Scarlet Witch was the death of Ultron in Infinity War. Wanda had to kill her synthezoid lover herself after Thanos showed up to attack Wakanda during an attempted procedure to safely remove the Mind Stone from Vision, attempted by Black Panther's brilliant sister, the Princess Shuri. As the procedure was cut short and everyone was pulled into the fray, Thanos was on his way to claim that stone when Viz asked Wanda to destroy it, and by extension, destroy him. She initially refused, but reluctantly agreed when Viz pressed her and insisted that she wouldn't and couldn't hurt him with her powers, and that all he felt when she used them on him was her. No pain, just her. Aw, so cute. Through tears, Scarlet Witch used her powers to destroy the stone, only to watch Thanos show up and use the Time Stone to rewind time, bring Vision back to life, so that he could destroy him by ripping the Mind Stone out of his head very painfully. Yikes. Number 2, possessed by Chthon. This is one of those times that Wanda was made a villain, truly without any of her own intent steering her there. Wanda was actually marked by Chthon at birth to act as the Elder God's vessel, should he find a way to return. Chthon would actually succeed in possessing Wanda and using her to return on more than one occasion, though the first time around was probably the worst, when Mordred summoned Chthon via a ritual, allowing the god to basically take hold of Wanda and leaving the Avengers powerless against his will. Fortunately, the disaster that would be Chthon's return was averted before the ritual could be fully completed. Thank goodness for dolls with parts of Wanda's soul in them. That's what happened. Number 1, losing her children. If you were to ask Wanda what one of the worst things that ever happened to her was, I'm sure she would likely answer the loss of her children. Although she would get her 2 twin boys, Billy and Tommy, back when their souls were basically reborn into our world, reincarnating them, she would never really get back the family that she had initially willed into existence. Using her power and from her desire, Wanda made it possible for her and Vision to have children together, and Wanda gave birth to 2 twin boys. However, when others learned that they weren't real and that their existence was kind of making reality unstable, they forced Scarlet Witch to confront the truth, temporarily destroying or displacing her children. Since they weren't really fully destroyed, because they kind of did come back, but just in a really weird comic book way. Number 10, Stan Lee's ire. Initially, Vision wasn't loved by all at Marvel's offices. In fact, Marvel legend Stan Lee hated the look and the name of the character apparently when he was first created in 1968 by John Buscema and Roy Thomas. Apparently, Stan complained to Roy about the choice of color for the android, not liking the look of his bright red appearance, and also felt the name was not a good fit, not strong enough for the character. Today, his appearance has become iconic, and we think nothing of it. But back when he was first created, it wasn't just with comic book characters that his existence was considered controversial. Number 9, death of his first creator. Despite the fact that we often attribute Vision's existence to Ultron, he wasn't the only one involved in his creation process. And no, I'm not talking about Tony Stark here. Professor Phineas Horton was forcefully recruited by Ultron into helping him create the synthezoid we later came to know as the Vision. Vision, in fact, was originally given the memories of Professor Horton's previous android creation, which brought on the rage of Ultron, who had specifically told Horton to wipe those memories. He's like, you do it or you're dead. And Horton was like, we'll see. Ultron, of course, did kill the professor, though, creating probably one of the first tragic moments in Vision's life to come about. At the time, the synthezoid mourned the life of his creator and swore to get revenge on Ultron. And before we move on to this next spot, just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this video and you want more like it, talking about Wanda or Vision or both of them together, oh, romantic moments, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help us out on the channel. Number 8, no sense of normalcy. Despite the fact that he might seem cold and seems to embrace his synthetic nature, Vision actually constantly strives to fit in. When Wanda and Vision first got married in the comics, they both sought to find normalcy together by settling down in a suburban neighborhood. Oh, it's so nice. Similar to what we've seen the couple attempts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the Disney Plus show WandaVision. Yeah, if you like WandaVision and you want to sort of read more things that maybe have inspired it, this is a miniseries you're going to want to read. The two of them, however, it seems were never fated to have a normal life, and try as they might, strange events always seemed to disrupt their attempts and lurk around every single corner. For an example of what I'm talking about, you need not look further than the first issue of their miniseries together from the 80s, The Vision and Scarlet Witch. Seriously though, check out this miniseries. On Halloween, a quiet night in quickly turns into something out of a nightmare, ending with a visit from Scarlet Witch's often villainous then-father, Magneto. So it becomes more of a nightmare, I imagine. Number 7, being controlled. The smallest spoilers ahead for WandaVision if you know nothing about it, but mostly this part is pretty safe as we'll just be focusing kind of on the premise of the show and what we know of it so far based on what has been implied in the episodes. So it's more of like a, if you know the show, you probably know this. In WandaVision, it's implied that Scarlet Witch, Wanda herself, is in complete control of everything going on in Westview, including Vision's appearance and existence there. After all, as we talked about before, Vision's appearance there likely means that Wanda manipulated him and brought him back to life, possibly even reanimating his lifeless corpse. Yikes. As the show unfolds, Vision becomes more suspicious of his life in Westview and Wanda and her involvement not just in it, but in manipulating it as well with her reality-altering powers. Also, I never noticed this before, but Westview's name actually seems to be a reference to the initial of the main characters of the show and the show title itself. Westview, WV. WandaVision, WV. Interesting. Also, it's weird that it took me so long to notice that, but I just noticed it today, so I was looking for all kinds of other explanations as to what Westview meant. I never thought about, like, the initials. Number 6. From the Torch to Wonder Man. The first Human Torch was not actually Johnny Storm, but was an android created by Professor Phineas Horton himself. Ultron, wanting to make his own such creation, kidnapped the Professor and forced him to build an android being for Ultron's own purposes, which we talked about a little bit earlier. The Professor, of course, modeled the Synthezoid after his own creation, but a little too closely for Ultron's liking, as I said, bestowing the Human Torch's memories as well to the creation we'd later come to know as Vision. Brought to life, this being attacked Ultron, who had killed the Professor as punishment for his betrayal. Unfortunately, Torch Vision, this version of Vision, was no match for Ultron, and in the end he actually ended up being reprogrammed by Ultron to follow his orders and was given the brain patterns of Wonder Man. Nothing against Wonder Man, by the way, but sharing brain patterns with that hero would cause lots of weirdness for Vision and for Scarlet Witch as well later on down the line. I feel like if you get to pick who you want to share brain patterns with, Wonder Man's not at the top of the list. Also, it's really weird that like Wonder Man's brain patterns were just lying around Hank Pym's lab in like a little recorder device. It's like, why did you have those, Hank Pym? What's going on?
Number 5. William Burnside. William Burnside, who had changed his name to Steve Rogers and even got work done on his face to match the look. He ended up developing another Captain America serum, and he and his buddy Jack tried to be the new Bucky and Cap. So they got enhanced abilities and they took down Red Skull. They did some pretty good work as a team. The only thing was, a year later, things started to go a little bit south. They started to become paranoid schizophrenics, so the government put them in cryogenic suspension. He went from being Captain America to being the villain, just like that. So William and his Bucky Barnes sidekick, Jack Monroe, both were in custody of Dr. Faustus, who brainwashed William to become the Grand Director, the leader of the hate group called the National Force. Number 4. 404. Cap not found. In Captain America issue 404, we see Steve Rogers squaring up against werewolves. Yeah, what a sight to see. You heard me correctly. I said werewolves. The story known as Children of the Night runs from issue 403 to 405. And during this time, Captain America is fighting off Starksboro werewolves, and then when Nightshade tries to inject Wolverine with her wolf serum, his healing factor keeps counteracting him. So Druid mesmerized him with serums too. Then the next issue, we see front and center Cap Wolf. Pretty hard to forget. So now he's a werewolf and he has faint memories of Steve Rogers. So, of course, as you would expect, it's a pretty messy good time. Number 3, Civil War. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie, like the comic, is superhero politics. If you're a superhero, you have to register. You can't just be out filming yourself doing super TikToks and then you end up accidentally exploding a school. It's just not gonna fly anymore. And in the movie, it's Wanda Maximoff who kickstarts the Sokovia Accords, forcing Tony to side with the government as he feels responsible for Charles Spencer, among many others' deaths, you know, with all the events that unfold with the Age of Ultron stuff. So Steve wants to protect Bucky this whole time, and of course, freedom throughout the team is encouraged. Now, eventually, due to Baron Zemo's work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are filled with Steve having to fight off Tony in order to save his best friend. And it's truly heartbreaking, and it all ends with Steve sticking the shield in Tony's chest, and as he carries away a broken down Winter Soldier, Tony says to him the shield does not belong to him, it belongs to his father. And that's the last time he sees the shield and Tony Stark, so it all goes downhill for Cap for quite a while after this point. Number 2. Stuck in Dimension Z. In the comic storyline Castaway in Dimension Z, Captain America ends up getting stuck in this land created by Arnim Zola, and he's in there for 12 years. That's some Black Mirror type torture. That's like crazy. So during the 12 years, Steve raised a boy named Ian, who's a kid he rescued from Zola as his own. So the whole thing is that Steve has to return to Earth soon before this implant on his torso that's combined with the virus of Zola's consciousness takes over his mind. Not a great scenario. Also, ouch, that doesn't look too comfortable of a procedure. It's one of the more brutal body injuries, and of course the whole being trapped for 12 years element, I mean, that just adds to this already horrible nightmare. And finally, number 1. Shot by Sharon Carter. We go back now to the Civil War comic book event where Captain America was killed by his girlfriend Sharon Carter. Yeah, so after Crossbones sniped him, Agent 13, who at the time was Cap's girlfriend, delivered the final bullet from a much closer range. Well, it turns out it wasn't Sharon who was doing the work, really. The classic brainwashing made this defeat happen. Dr. Faustus. Okay, this causes a whole chain of events. I mean, for starters, Bucky decides he should then kill Iron Man after this, blaming him for the death of Steve Rogers. powers. And then also Falcon ends up going after his own lead, he just leaves. And now Tony ended up showing Bucky the letter Cap wrote about how he should be the next Captain America. And Bucky agrees to take the spot only if he can operate solo. No government, no big brother watching, just let me do my job, move out of the way, you guys suck. To think all this came to a climax after Steve's girlfriend was the one to deliver that final blow just adds insult to injury. Kicking off the list at number 10, his childhood. One of the origin stories for the twins involves them being experimented on from Loki's scepter. Another one of those origins is when they were raised by a cow. Yep, you heard me, I said a cow. Bova Ayrshire was one of the few new men who stayed behind after her creator left to go back to space. So basically, she's this evolved cow created by the High Evolutionary as one of his new men. Now these animals that are given humanoid form and a pretty smart brain to go along with as well, their purpose was to be this nurse or caretaker for other new men and the Knights of Wundagore. Then a pregnant Magda Lensher came along the Citadel after leaving her husband and had Wanda and Pietro and left them with the new nice cow lady. Now eventually Bova gave up the twins to the Maximoffs who lived down the mountain, and even Miss America and the Wizard declined the twins. So nobody wanted these poor twins. So right from the beginning, you know it's gonna be a rough one. And before we continue on to number 9, guys, if you haven't already, could you please go down and give us a thumbs up on this video, because those likes really do us wonders for our channel. Thank you so much for the support. Now back to some Quicksilver. Number 9, genetic experiment. When they were just kids, Pietro and Wanda Maximoff also had a tragic origin in the MCU. The twins, just at age 10, were in their apartment building in Sokovia when a bomb collapsed the building. Now this was the reason their parents had passed away, and then the second shell hit, however, but it didn't explode. Rather, it left the twins to sit there and stare at it, horrified that at any second it could go off, with the word Stark on the side of the shell as well. Very important. They grew up with a different mindset towards the Avengers, and this led to them being experimented on by Baron von Strucker. This is also where their powers come from. Now this is something that is slowly coming back to light in the MCU. Now with WandaVision's ominous commercials that keep popping up, many fans have suggested that they are hints at her past traumas, and the commercial with the toaster with the blinking red light could be a reference to when the twins were waiting for the bomb to go off when they were kids. I suppose it's not very easy to forget something like that growing up. Now with the last 2 episodes just around the corner, we finally get to see what's going on in that magical mutant brain-verse. Number 8, forced to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Pietro follows his twin sister Wanda everywhere. He is extremely protective, and if she wants to join a Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, well, I guess he has to come along for the trip to make sure everything goes well. I guess. Since their first appearance in X-Men issue 4, Wanda felt like she owed Magneto because he saved their lives. But Quicksilver can't really disagree and leave her, no way. So he's like, whatever, screw it, I'll join as well. Although he makes it very clear where he stands with their ideas. They didn't do much with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, or at least Quicksilver tried not to do much. Like when Magneto wanted to nuke a country, Quicksilver steps in and opposes him. Number 7, depressed. In the Son of M storyline, Quicksilver is not having an easy go. See, he fell into a deep depression after losing his powers and his sister and his reputation all at the same time, which I'll get into a little bit later. So while walking around the city, opposed to his normal blink and you'll miss him speed, he came across some thugs. And when he tried to help out, naturally, his powers weren't there to be relied on, so he got knocked to the ground in one punch. And just then, Spider-Man comes in to save the day. He webs everybody up, and then he noticed that there was just one guy missing from the initial count. So he grabbed and webbed up Pietro as he was trying to jump off a building. Spider-Man isn't happy with him at this point either. His son is no longer alive, and he can't bury him because, well, he never existed thanks to Pietro's bright idea. So he tries to jump again off the building. This time he succeeds in hitting the ground. Now luckily he was saved, but this is just still not a great time for Pietro, probably one of the worst times. Number 6, Age of Ultron sacrifice. When the twins were introduced in the MCU, it was during Avengers Age of Ultron, when Baron von Strucker had used Loki's scepter to experiment on the Maximoff twins, resulting in one becoming a witch and the other being super fast. Now apparently he's not as fast as we all thought, because when it came down to getting Hawkeye and the daughter of a Sokovian villager to safety, he was just a little bit too slow. He thought it was a better idea to run in front of the bullets and take them all rather than, you know, just zip them to safety. It didn't help that 1 year earlier we saw it in theaters, Evan Peters' version of Quicksilver in X-Men Days of Futures Past, and he was having a great time. He was pushing bullets out of the way with ease, he was making guards punch each other, he was trying out soup while he was doing his job. It seemed like a breeze, and he was rocking out to some music the entire time as well. But then Joss Whedon came in and decided to not make him as fast or powerful as that Quicksilver that we all kind of got used to, and then we see Aaron Taylor Johnson as Quicksilver die in just one movie, just like that. He's like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Aaron Taylor John. Okay, and I'm out. Awesome. See you guys. Have a great set. Cheers.
Number 5, used as a pawn in the Civil War. This is more exclusive to the movies, as Bucky didn't play quite as active a role in the first Civil War itself in the comics, but Winter Soldier was a huge part of the reason Iron Man and Captain America came to blows in the MCU's Civil War. Winter Soldier was revealed to be an assassin who was actually Captain America's brainwashed former BFF, James Buchanan Barnes. Gasp! Barnes was framed for the explosive attack on the Vienna International Center during the signing of the Sokovia Accords by Helmut Zemo to create a rift between the supers. Barnes was free and was seeking to learn more of his true past, but Zemo also reactivated his programming to take hold of the Winter Soldier once more so that he could use him to tear apart the Avengers and turn them against one another, especially after he revealed that the Winter Soldier was actually the one responsible for killing Tony's parents. Number 4. Frozen. Like Cap, Bucky Barnes was also frozen, being plunged into frozen waters and later retrieved by a Soviet submarine. Being frozen not only doesn't sound pleasant, because, you know, it's cold and uncomfortable and it hurts, but also it sounds pretty deadly. Bucky was lucky he survived, actually. In fact, the scientists that were to study him weren't even sure that it would be possible to revive him, and after studying him for 2 weeks without finding any traces of the super soldier serum that they had been looking for and hoping to find in his blood, they decided to put him back on ice. Bucky was put into stasis mode for 9 years before he would be revived again so that he could be transformed and weaponized. Number 3. Brainwashed. Bucky was believed dead after he went missing in action. In reality, we later learned that while he had lost his arm in the incident that people believed had killed him, Bucky himself had actually survived. Unfortunately, it was the Soviet Union who had found him and took him in. Keeping his discovery a secret, they brainwashed Barnes, making him loathe the West, turning him into a cyborg, giving him a cybernetic arm in place of the one that he'd lost, and began training him to turn him into their very own weapon and assassin. Number 2. Recaptured. The Winter Soldier, it should be noted, has escaped his captors in the past, but sadly, due to having his brains kinda scrambled, was never able to free himself fully due to the fact that he found himself confused without his handlers and lost. After the assassination of Senator Harry Baxter, the Winter Soldier missed making his extraction point and instead disappeared, going off the grid. Unfortunately for him, without his puppet masters controlling him, he didn't really know where to turn or what to do, and he ended up being recaptured by them shortly thereafter, eventually being located in New York and then taken back in. They decided that his return to America must have triggered something in him, wiped his brain, and were careful to note in his file that missions that would take him to the USA should be avoided in the future. Number 1. Used as a deadly weapon. In the MCU and in the comics, the Winter Soldier is brainwashed and programmed to be an assassin and a weapon, which is probably why he and Black Widow get along so well in the comics and even end up together romantically now and then. They both understand what it's like to be made into a monster, to be manipulated into doing evil deeds that they probably ordinarily wouldn't have done otherwise, but that they still obviously carry a lot of guilt about. The Winter Soldier was used to take out a ton of targets over the years, including Howard Stark and Maria Stark in the MCU, and in the comics, Nomad, Wolverine's love Itsu Akihiro, and President John F. Kennedy, to name a few.
Number 10 is childhood. Superheroes usually don't have an easy childhood. Either they're bullied, they're born with advanced abilities that make them an outcast or a threat, or something traumatic happens with their parents. And in the case of Sam Wilson, he grew up in a tough neighborhood in Harlem, and his father Paul was a minister and tragically met his fate one night after trying to stop a fight between 2 gangs. Sam was only 9 years old when this happened, and soon after, his mother Darlene was attacked by a mugger and she didn't make it. She passed away protecting her children. Sam, being so young and vulnerable, struggled with his parents passing, and his path hasn't always been that of a hero's path, because before he became the Falcon, he became... Guys, before we continue on to number 9 on our list, we just want to say thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't done so already, if you could go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it really does help us out on our channel quite a bit. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to some more Sam Wilson. Number 9. Snap Wilson. So after the death of his parents, Sam figured the next move would be to dip down into the criminal life. He was angry, he was upset. This was probably what I would have done. So he went by the name of Snap Wilson, and long ago in the comics, there was a Captain America and Falcon issue that said, "Revealed at last the true facts behind the origin of the Falcon." And then it says, "Today Falcon slays Captain America at the command of the Red Skull." What? So this history with Sam being a hustler was retconned so that the Red Skull had in fact used the Cosmic Cube in order to make Sam a criminal turned into captain. Now, it was apparently part of Red Skull's plan to use Falcon against Steve when the time was right down the road. Now, later on in Captain America issue 276, this retcon was cleared up even more when Sarah refers back to Snap Wilson yet again. She goes on to explain in that issue that it was all over the newspapers back when the Red Skull used Sam against Captain America. So many writers throughout many of these years of comics actually wanted to retcon the whole Snap Wilson phase, appropriately so. Number 8, the other Snap. I mean, turning into dust and vanishing for 5 years, that's probably gotta suck. Now, of course, we have to mention Infinity War on this list. So when Thanos had all of the stones but one, everybody made a last effort to stop the Mad Titan, but it just wasn't enough power. Falcon tried to stop him by shooting his twin guns at him, but Thanos used the Space Stone on him to knock him out of the air onto the ground. Ouch. And then Thanos then gave each and every other Avenger a piece of pain, with Vision of course being last, having his Mind Stone pulled out of his forehead. And after he obtained all of the Infinity Stones, it just got worse. Falcon turned into ashes while he was crawling through the grass of Wakanda, and while he was fading out of existence, Rhodey was seen not too far behind him calling out Sam's name. So sad. I was so happy when he came back, but like, man, having that be the last that we saw of all these heroes for a whole year, that wasn't easy on my emotions. Number 7, Roscoe Simons. Roscoe was a Captain America fan, as we all are, and he got the opportunity of a lifetime in Captain America issue 181. He proved himself more than capable to carry the shield after Cap had left it, and it was up to Sam Wilson to train Roscoe Simons. So Sam had this mindset. He was hopeful that Roscoe would see the real life dangers of actually wearing this suit. It wasn't just Halloween, you put on a suit, you whip a frisbee, and then you're like, cool, I got him. It was scary, it was hard. It was at a time in the government where it wasn't a good idea to be this type of character. And he was hoping that he would retire. But in issue 182, Sam tells Roscoe that he's gonna look after him. So Falcon did his best to protect the new hero, but in the very next issue, we see front and center the death of a hero. It was pretty brutal as well how Red Skull took him out. It was a very public way in order to warn others who want to step up to that same mantle. Now poor Roscoe, but also poor Sam Wilson. He told this guy he'd watch his back, and now he has his blood on his hands, and also he has his blood on his future suit, which is not ideal. Number 6, lost a fight to Ant-Man. It was a great audition, but it will never happen again. Those are the words Sam Wilson says to Scott Lang when they meet for the second time in Captain America Civil War. The first time they met was when Scott was sent to the New Avengers facility by Hank Pym in the first Ant-Man movie. See, Scott wasn't aware that he was going there, but once he arrived, Sam Wilson was sure aware of his presence. Falcon demanded to know why he was there, and when Ant-Man said he needed to borrow the signal decoy, Falcon just wasn't buying it, and they went at it. And at one point, Sam pulled out guns and shot at Scott. That's how much he thought he was a spy, but Scott won, not by using the higher ground, but by using the smaller one. He shrunk down and got into Sam's jetpack, pulled some plugs, and then Sam fell down to the ground, letting the new Avenger finish his mission. So Sam called into Natasha and made it very clear that Steve never hears about this in the future. Don't worry, Sam, I think all is forgiven at this point. Number 5, the helicopter crash. So in issue 147 of Nightwing, we see Harvey Two-Face Dent do a little good for Dick Grayson. So this is after Batman had apparently died. So Two-Face tips off Nightwing on a young woman named Carol Benjamin who needed help. So Nightwing swoops in to save the day. While trying to help her get to safety via a helicopter, bullets start to fly in from the darkness, and officers are being taken out left, right, and center. So while the helicopter is going down, Nightwing saves Carol right at the last second, but not without getting hurt during the process. Don't worry, that's not your blood, he says. It's mine. And there's quite a bit of blood. Number 4, shot by the Joker. Being the sidekick to Batman sounds like the greatest gig ever, but eventually I'm sure you want to go about your own way. So when he was just 17 years old, Dick Grayson was actually shot in the shoulder by the Joker. So Batman decided that would be a perfect time to end his crime-fighting days. Well, this might have been just the push that he needed, because that's when Dick donned this new Nightwing persona in the first place. He came back stronger and ready to go. All it took was a nice bullet in the shoulder to get things in motion. Number 3, shot again. So during the Batman War Games storyline, Act 3, Part 3, Dick is shot. Again, he actually gets shot quite a bit. Each, I imagine, gets more painful than the previous. I don't think that's a feeling you get used to, like tattoos, I don't know. So Gotham City is not a safe place at all during this storyline, obviously. Chaos has erupted with villains like Black Mask, Killer Croc, and Tarantula trying to bid control over the city. So there was an order from a new police commissioner to shoot anybody in costume. That includes Nightwing. So while he was scrapping it out with Firefly, a Gotham City police officer took his shot and nailed Nightwing right in the leg. Number 2, beaten up by Two-Face. The first year of any job can have its hiccups. For the boy Wonder, those hiccups left scars and bruises, evidently. So in Robin Year 1, Issue 2, we see Robin try to save Batman and the DA of Gotham. He gets restrained and he watches as Two-Face flips a coin to decide the DA's fate. But the deal, of course, is still a lose-lose. After cutting the DA free, they proceeded to fall into water and drown. And after that, he beats Robin to a pulp, all while Batman has to stand there tied up and watch the whole thing. And finally, number 1, shot in the head. Okay, we got bullets being fired into shoulders, legs, but this last one, it's gotta be the worst. It has to be the worst. We jump over now to Batman issue 55, where we see Nightwing and Batman patrolling Gotham City as usual. Nightwing playfully challenges Batman to a contest. Whoever jumps off the building and shoots their grapple gun first loses. It's kind of like a let's see who can get closest to the bottom. So Batman eventually agrees. They make the dive and Nightwing technically wins because Batman breaks early to attend the bat symbol. Still a win. I mean, we love games, right? Well, at the same time Nightwing and Batman were talking to Jim Gordon, KG Beast was taking aim at Nightwing's head. And then, bam, a bullet strikes Dick's head, and he wasn't the same afterwards. Fun grapple games, and then minutes later, serious brain trauma. The bad luck never ends with this guy. God.